Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a gentle, winding journey back in time. We're not visiting grand battles or the courts of kings, but instead, we're peeking into one of the most curious, and frankly, bizarre corners of human history, the world of medicine before. Well, it really knew what it was doing. We'll be your unfortunate patient, a time-minus traveling test subject in an era where the cure could be infinitely stranger than the disease. Frankly, if you were to catch a common cold on this trip, your chances of making it through the first day are, let's say, interesting. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always a strange and wonderful feeling to know we're all scattered across the globe, sharing this quiet moment. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the heat, not a damp, sticky heat, but a dry, ancient heat that radiates from the sand and the enormous stone buildings around you. You're in Egypt. Thousands of years ago, the air is thick with the scent of the Nile River, a mix of damp earth, Typeer's reeds, and life. You can hear the distant murmur of a marketplace. But here, in the shadow of a grand temple, it's quieter, and that's a good thing, because you're not feeling well. A persistent cough has settled in your chest, and a fever makes the world shimmer at the edges. You need a doctor. So, you seek one out, but you don't go to a clinic or an office. You go to the temple, because in ancient Egypt, the lines between medicine, magic, and religion are almost non-existent. The man you meet is a SWNW pronounced Su-NOO, a doctor, but he is also a priest. HES clean minus shaven, his head gleaming in the sun, and he wears crisp, white linen robes. He looks at you with an expression that is both analytical and deeply spiritual. He doesn't just ask where it hurts. He asks about your dreams. He wants to know if you might have offended a specific god, or perhaps if a deceased relative is angry with you. Maybe an enemy has paid a sorcerer to place a curse on you. To him, your illness isn't just a random assortment of symptoms. It's a tangible, malevolent force, an intruder that has taken up residence in your body. It could be the work of a god, a demon, or the bitter spirit of the dead. His job is not just to treat your body, but to exorcise this spiritual trespass. After a careful examination, which might involve listening to your chest and inspecting your eyes, he prepares a remedy. You watch as a scribe, working under his direction, begins to grind ingredients with a mortar and pestle. Some of them seem reasonable enough. A spoonful of honey that makes sense. It's soothing. Some crushed occasional eaves. You've heard they can help with coughs. But then, he adds another ingredient. Something dark and fibrous that you don't recognize. You ask what it is. He tells you, matter minus of minus factly, that it's crocodile dung. You hesitate, and for good reason. The idea is that a foul minus tasting, repulsive substance will offend the demon inside you and convince it to leave your body in disgust. This is a core principle of their medicine. Prescriptions from the time, recorded on documents like the famous Ebers papers, are filled with ingredients that would make a modern pharmacist faint: fly specks, lizard blood, fat from a hippopotamus, and even finely ground mouse paste. But here's the fascinating part, and a topic historians still debate: were these remedies pure superstition, or was there some accidental science at play? While the magical thinking is obvious, some of these ingredients did have real effects. We now know that honey is a natural antibacterial agent. Some animal dung, while crawling with its own dangers, can contain antibiotic mold, a bit like a primitive penicillin. Academics still argue whether the Egyptians stumbled upon these effective ingredients by chance, through millennia of trial and error, or if there was a more systematic, albeit misunderstood, process of observation at play. They didn't know why it worked, but they observed that it sometimes did. The priest minus doctor finishes mixing your medicine. It's a gritty, unpleasant minus looking paste, which he mixes with a little beer to make it easier to swallow. But the physical concoction is only half the cure. As he hands it to you, he begins to chant. His voice is low and rhythmic, reciting a powerful incantation to a god like Thoth, the ibis minus-headed patron of wisdom, or Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of both plague and healing. The spell is a direct command to the sickness, ordering it to leave your body, to flow out of you and dissipate into the desert air. The words are the magic that activates the medicine. You take the cup, close your eyes, and drink. It tastes just as bad as you imagined. Now, all you can do is go home, lie down on your reed mat, and wait for the magic, the gods, and the crocodile dung to do their work. As you lie there on your reed mat, the world feels soft and blurry at the edges. The potent mixture of beer, honey, and other things sits heavy in your stomach. The priest's rhythmic chanting still seems to echo faintly in the warm air. You drift in a state between wakefulness and feverish sleep, and a thought floats into your mind: how does anyone keep all of this straight? Is it crocodile dung for a cough and lizard blood for a headache, or the other way around? Surely, someone must be writing this down. And you're absolutely right. The knowledge of your SW and W isn't just passed down through whispered words from master to apprentice. It's recorded, meticulously, on one of the most remarkable documents in the history of medicine. We call it the Ebers Papers. Imagine, for a moment, not a book, but a scroll, a single, continuous roll of paper that, if you were to unfurl it completely, would stretch out over 20 meters, or about 65 feet. It's a delicate, honey-minus-colored artifact, covered in elegant hieratic script, a kind of cursive hieroglyphics written in black and red ink, found in the 19th century, supposedly nestled between the legs of a mummy in a tomb near Thebes. This scroll is our single most important window into the mind of an ancient Egyptian physician. Unrolling this papers is like opening a time capsule of their entire medical world. It's not just a random list of cures. It's surprisingly organized. There are over 700 magical formulas and folk remedies. You'd find chapters on intestinal diseases, sections on eye and skin problems, and even a treatise on the heart. The Egyptians believed the heart was the center of a network of metu, or channels, that ran throughout the body. These channels carried everything: air, blood, tears, saliva, urine, and spirits. Sickness, in their view, was often caused by a blockage or disruption in one of these channels, perhaps caused by the very demons your doctor was trying to exorcise. But it's the specifics of the remedies that truly make you appreciate the strange beauty of their system. Let's say your neighbor has a baby who won't stop crying. The Ebers Papers has a cure for that. The remedy is simple: poop from flies, which is on the wall, is gathered, made into a paste, strained, and drunk for 4 days. It's so specific, not just any poop, but fly droppings from a wall. There's no explanation as to why. It's stated with the same confident authority as a modern prescription. Struggling with baldness? The papers suggests a potent concoction made from the fats of a lion, a hippopotamus, a crocodile, a cat, a snake, and an ibex, all mixed together and rubbed vigorously into your scalp. The magical thinking here is almost transparent by applying the essence of these powerful and, in most cases, hairy or scaly creatures. You might absorb some of their vitality, and the treatments blend the physical and the magical so seamlessly. For a migraine, one prescription advises you to get a clay crocodile, your to put some herbs in its mouth, and then tie the whole ceramic reptile to your head using a strip of linen. But not just any linen. It should be linen on which the name of a god has been written. You are, in effect, wearing a prayer, a magical effigy, and an herbal poultice all at once. This is where the real academic head-scratching begins. What exactly was the Ebers Papers? Historians and Egyptologists have been debating this for decades. Is it a textbook designed to teach student doctors the established methods of the day? The organized structure suggests this might be the case. Or was it more of a reference manual for a practicing physician, something a SWNW could consult when faced with a tricky case? Like a modern Merck manual? Or perhaps we're looking at it all wrong. Maybe it wasn't a medical text in our sense at all, but a collection of magical incantations. In this view, the ingredients, whether honey or fly specks, were secondary. The real power lay in the ritual, in the spoken words and the sacred script. The physical medicine was just a vehicle for the magic. The truth, as is often the case, is probably a mix of all three. The Egyptian mind didn't build the same walls between science, religion, and magic that we do. To them, a prayer was a valid medical tool, a demon was a legitimate diagnosis, and a foul-smelling poultice was a logical way to drive it out. They were observing the world, noting what seemed to work, and interpreting it all through the only framework. They had a universe alive with gods and spirits. So as you lie there, drifting off, you are the living embodiment of that 20-meter long scroll. The bitterness in your mouth is the physical remedy. The priest's lingering words are the incantation, and the belief that a malevolent force is being driven from the channels of your body is the diagnosis. It is all one and the same treatment. The world is a magical place, and for now, in the hazy warmth of your small home by the Nile, that feels perfectly, sleepily, logical. The fever eventually breaks, and the cough subsides, but you're left with a lingering weariness, the sense that something inside you is still not quite right. The world of crocodile, dung and divine incantations fades like a strange dream. You find yourself moving, drifting across the deep blue of the Mediterranean, until the landscape changes. The air is no longer dry and sandy, but soft and scented with salt and olive trees. White stone buildings gleam under a brilliant sun, set against hills of silvery green. You've drifted forward in time and westward in space. You're in ancient Greece. Here, when you get sick, you hear whispers of a different kind of healer, not a priest, but a thinker, a man who believes that the gods might exist, but they probably aren't personally responsible for your head cold. You seek out a physician, a follower of a new, revolutionary school of thought from the island of Kos. He doesn't meet you in a temple, but in a clean, simple room open to the fresh air. He is calm, observant, and asks you a series of methodical questions. He is less interested in your dreams and more interested in what you've been eating, the climate you live in, your daily habits. He listens carefully to your chest, just as the Egyptian SWNW did. But he doesn't mention angry spirits. Instead, after a long period of quiet contemplation, he explains his diagnosis. Your problem, he says, is not a demon. It is an imbalance. He tells you that your body, and indeed the entire universe, is governed by four fundamental substances, or humors. First, there is blood, which is warm and moist, like the air of springtime. Then there is phlegm, cold and moist, like the water of winter. Third is yellow bile, hot and dry, like the fire of summer. And finally, there is black bile, cold and dry, like the earth of autumn. A healthy person, he explains, has these four fluids in perfect, harmonious balance. All sickness, from a mild melancholy to a raging fever, is simply the result of one of these humors becoming excessive or deficient. This is the foundational theory of Hippocrates, the man now called the father of medicine. He and his followers looked at you and saw not a soul possessed, but a finely tuned machine that had fallen out of calibration. If you were cheerful and energetic, you were sanguine, ruled by blood. If you were calm and apathetic, you were phlegmatic. If you were irritable and short-tempered, you were choleric, an excess of yellow bile. And if you were sad and quiet, you were melancholic, suffering from too much black bile. Your personality, and your physical health were two sides of the same coin, dictated by the simmering soup of liquids within you. Your lingering fatigue and paleness, he might diagnose an excess of phlegm, making you sluggish and cold. The treatment, therefore, is logical within this framework. He won't try to scare a demon out of you. He will try to restore your balance. His first prescription is not a potion, but a diet. Food is his primary medicine. He might prescribe warm and dry foods like roasted meats and whole minus grain bread to counteract the cold, wet nature of the phlegm. He'll tell you to avoid fish and cucumbers. One of the go-2 remedies in the Hippocratic toolkit for almost any ailment was a specific kind of barley soup or gruel called pitizan. It was considered incredibly easy to digest and was prescribed for everything from fevers to recovery from wounds. This is where we get to one of the great historical arguments: was Hippocrates even a real person? The collection of about 60 medical texts attributed to him, known as the Hippocratic Corpus, was written over a span of decades, perhaps even a century, and contains different styles and even conflicting medical opinions. Many historians today argue that there probably was a physician named Hippocrates who started this rational movement, that his name became a byword for a whole school of thought. Hippocrates was less a single author and more of a brand, representing a radical new idea that disease was a natural process, not a supernatural punishment. Even the famous Hippocratic Oath, which we imagine every Greek doctor solemnly swearing, is a subject of debate. Scholars argue over its true origins and how many physicians of the era actually took it seriously. Your Greek doctor also prescribes rest, fresh air, and gentle walks. He believes nature is the greatest healer. The body, he tells you, has a natural tendency to rebalance itself. His job is simply to help it along. It all feels wonderfully sensible, refreshingly modern after the magical thinking of Egypt. But what if the diet and rest don't work? What if your humoral imbalance is too severe? Then, he might move on to more direct interventions to get rid of excess phlegm. He might give you an emetic to make you vomit, or a laxative to purge your system from the other end. And if your illness was deemed an excess of blood, say, a high fever that made your face flush red, he would turn to the most famous and infamous treatment of all bloodletting. With a small, sharp blade, he would open a vein and drain a carefully measured amount of the excess humor into a bowl, believing this would bring your entire system back into equilibrium. You leave the Greek physician with a list of foods to eat and avoid, and a new way of seeing yourself. You are a container for powerful liquids, a microcosm of the universe and its four seasons. It's a beautifully complete philosophical system. It's also, of course, completely wrong. But as you walk slowly through the olive grove, breathing in the clean air, you have to admit it feels a little more dignified to have a humor imbalance than to be possessed by a demon who is afraid of crocodile poop. The sensible, sun-drenched world of Hippocratic Greece begins to fade, replaced by something grander, louder, and more chaotic. The gentle scent of olive groves gives way to the smells of dust, sweat, and roasting meat. The quiet murmur of philosophical debate is drowned out by the roar of a crowd. You're in Rome, the bustling, colossal heart of an empire, and you're standing in the shadow of the Colosseum. You're here because you want to find the best doctor in the city. And in the Roman Empire, the most famous physician of all didn't get his start in a quiet healing sanctuary or a dusty library. He learned his trade here, amidst the blood and sand of the arena. His name was Galen. Galen was a Greek physician, born in Pergamon, modern-day Turkey, who moved to Rome and became the personal doctor to a succession of emperors. But his formative years were spent as the chief physician to the gladiators. Imagine his workplace. Every day, he was presented with the kind of horrific injuries a normal doctor might not see in a lifetime: deep gashes from swords, gaping wounds from trident tests, flesh torn by the claws of wild beasts. It was a brutal, high-stakes classroom, and Galen was its star pupil. This unique experience gave him an unparalleled understanding of practical anatomy and trauma care. While other physicians were still debating the finer points of humoral theory and elegant gauze, Galen was literally elbow-minus deep in the reality of the human body. He became a master at treating wounds. He would wash them with wine and early accidental use of an antiseptic and develop sophisticated surgical techniques for stitching up severed tendons and muscles. The gladiators under his care had a surprisingly high survival rate, which made him famous throughout the empire. You managed to get an audience with this legendary doctor. He is confident, brilliant, and more than a little arrogant. He takes the 4 minus humor theory of Hippocrates and elevates it into an elaborate, all minus encompassing system that will dominate Western medicine for the next 500 years. To Galen, it wasn't just a theory, it was dogma. But Galen was more than just a theorist. He was a relentless experimenter. Since Roman law forbade the dissection of human bodies, Galen had to get creative. He turned to the animal kingdom. You might find him in his study, painstakingly dissecting a pig or a Barbary ape. He would perform live vivisection as, demonstrating to a crowd of students how, by tying off a certain nerve, he could silence the squeal of a pig, proving that the voice originated from the brain, not the heart. He mapped the nervous system and was the first to prove that arteries carry blood, not air, as had been previously believed. Here's a slightly bizarre side minus note from his practice. Galen was a huge proponent of a massive, multi-minus ingredient medicine called the react. It was the ultimate cure minus all, an absurdly complex concoction that could contain over 60 ingredients, including things like viper's flesh, opium, and various exotic spices. It was incredibly expensive and difficult to make, and Galen wrote entire books on its proper preparation. Emperors took it daily as a preventative measure against poison and disease. Believing in this super-minus drug was a key part of his medical identity. But his work had a fundamental flaw, and it's a mistake that would haunt medicine for centuries. Because he could only dissect animals, he assumed that their anatomy was identical to humans. He described the human liver as having 5 lobes, just like a dog's. He believed the human jawbone was 2 separate bones, like in a pig, and he described an on-minus existent network of blood vessels at the base of the brain, called the rete mirabile, the marvelous net, which he found in sheep, and assumed humans had it too. For over 1,000 years, doctors would study Galen's texts as gospel. They were literally reading a map of the human body that was based on farm animals. This is where academics still debate Galen's legacy. Was he a pioneering scientist who pushed the boundaries of knowledge in a restrictive society? Or was he an egotistical dogmatist whose overwhelming authority actually stifled medical progress for centuries to come? The answer is likely both. His experimental method was revolutionary, but the certainty with which he presented his flawed conclusions meant that for millennium, to question Galen was to question medicine itself. So Galen examines you. He takes your pulse with intense focus, believing he can feel the state of all 4 of your humors just from the rhythm and quality of your blood flow. He is the ultimate diagnostician of his day. He combines the philosophy of Hippocrates with the bloody, practical knowledge of the gladiator school. He explains your ailment to you in terms of humors, but his understanding of the body's internal workings, its plumbing and wiring, is far more detailed than anything the Greeks had imagined. He might prescribe a specific diet, a complex herbal remedy, perhaps even a small, affordable version of the react, and, of course, a bit of bloodletting to restore your humoral balance. You leave his presence feeling like you have been seen by a true genius, a man who has wrestled with the very secrets of life. You feel confident in his care. You don't know that his perfect map of your body is actually a composite sketch of an ape, a pig, and a sheep. But for now, in the glorious, roaring heart of Rome, his confidence is your confidence. And in a world without antibiotics or modern surgery, sometimes confidence was the most powerful medicine of all. you find yourself lingering in this Greco-Roman world of rational, if flawed, medicine. Galen's confidence is reassuring, and the idea that your body is a system to be understood feels like a solid foundation. But as you spend more time here, you start to hear whispers of a particular ailment, a condition that seems to perplex and frustrate even the most brilliant physicians. It's a sickness that affects only women, and its supposed cause is one of the most peculiar concepts in medical history. One afternoon, you are sitting in the courtyard of a villa, listening to a conversation between a wealthy Roman matron and her physician, a student of Galen's work. The woman is describing a laundry list of symptoms: shortness of breath, anxiety, a feeling of pressure in her chest, sleepless nights, and a general sense of unease. Today, we might recognize this as a classic anxiety attack or a cluster of stress-related symptoms. But her doctor doesn't ask about her worries or her daily pressures. Instead, he nods gravely and brings up a delicate subject: her womb. He explains to her, with complete certainty, that her uterus is an independent creature. It is, he says, like an animal living inside her body. And this animal has a tendency to get restless. It gets dry and light if she is not regularly engaging in marital relations. And when it becomes dry, it begins to wander. It detaches from its proper place in her lower abdomen and travels upwards through her body, searching for moisture. As it moves, it presses against other organs, causing chaos. If it presses on her diaphragm, she feels short of breath. If it pushes against her heart, she feels anxiety and palpitations. If it gets all the way up to her head, it can cause dizziness, seizures, or even suffocation. This, you realize, is the infamous diagnosis of hysteria. The word itself comes from the Greek hystere, meaning uterus. For thousands of years, a vast array of female ailments that doctors couldn't otherwise explain were blamed on this wandering womb. The concept didn't start with the Romans. It dates back to the Egyptians and was formalized by the Greeks. Plato himself described the womb as a living creature, eager to bear children, that becomes indignant and roams the body if left barren for too long. The treatments for this condition are just as strange as the diagnosis. The goal is to either lure the womb back down or to repel it from the top. So, the physician might prescribe pleasant-smelling substances to be held to the woman's pelvic region. She would be instructed to sit over sweet-smelling incense or apply fragrant oils. The idea was that the animal of the uterus would be attracted to the pleasant aroma and wander back down to its proper place. At the same time, she would be given foul-smelling things to sniff, like burnt wool or castor oil. This was meant to disgust the womb, which was thought to have its own sense of smell, and drive it away from her head and chest. Here's a peculiar, and rather invasive, tidbit of this belief system. Some physicians, including Galen, believed that the wandering womb was caused by a buildup of a specific female humor or fluid that could only be expelled through intercourse. Therefore, marriage and pregnancy were often prescribed as the ultimate medical cure for an unmarried young woman or a widow suffering from hysteria. The doctor's primary prescription was, essentially, to get married as soon as possible. Medicine and social pressure became completely intertwined. The debate among historians on this topic is fascinating. Was the wandering womb a genuine, if bizarre, medical theory, an honest attempt to explain a confusing set of symptoms in a world without knowledge of hormones or neurology? Or was it a tool of a patriarchal society, a way to pathologize female emotions and behavior that didn't conform to social expectations? Academics argue that it served both purposes. It was a medical model born of profound ignorance about female anatomy, but it was also conveniently used to enforce social norms. A woman who was anxious, frustrated, or unhappy could be dismissed as being physically ill, her perfectly valid emotions invalidated by a diagnosis that implied she was being ruled by a wayward organ. Even the way they thought the uterus was tethered inside the body was a subject of strange speculation. Some ancient writers believed it was directly connected to the brain and heart by fine ligaments, and when the womb moved, it would pull on these tethers, causing emotional and physical distress. They imagined a direct, physical connection between a woman's reproductive organs and her emotional state, a literal string pulling on her heart and mind. So you listen to this Roman doctor calmly explaining to this distressed woman that the animal inside her needs to be coaxed back into its pen. He doesn't see her as a person suffering from anxiety. He sees her as a vessel whose primary organ has gone rogue. The cure isn't understanding her mind, but managing her body, and by extension, her social role. As you sit there, you feel a profound shift from the more straightforward, is still incorrect, humoral theory. This is something different. It's a theory that is not just about a simple imbalance of fluids, but about gender, anatomy, and social control, all wrapped up in a single, deeply strange medical idea. The sun is warm, the villa is beautiful, but for the first time on this journey, the medical explanation feels not just wrong, but profoundly, chillingly dismissive. It's a quiet reminder that sometimes the strangest medical beliefs are the ones that are less about the body and more about the society that is trying to understand it. The grand, orderly world of Roman medicine, with its confident pronouncements on galenic certainty, starts to show some cracks. You begin to look beyond the individual doctor's office and notice the city itself. And what you see is a paradox. Rome is, in many ways, a marvel of public health. You walk on paved streets, a luxury that will vanish for 1,000 years after the empire falls. Above you, magnificent aqueducts, monuments of engineering, march across the countryside, carrying millions of gallons of fresh, clean water into the city every day. This water feeds enormous public bathhouses where citizens from all walks of life can cleanse themselves, socialize, and relax. You see public latrines, where running water constantly flows beneath the stone benches to carry waste away into a sophisticated sewer system, the famous Cloaca Maxima. Compared to what will come later in the medieval period, ancient Rome seems like a paradise of hygiene. They understood, on a practical level, that clean water and sanitation were important. The army, in particular, knew to build its camps away from swamps and to secure clean water sources, which gave them a huge advantage over their enemies. They were engineering a healthy society. But then you look closer, and the paradox deepens. You lean over a fountain, watching the clear water splash into a basin, and you notice that the pipes feeding it are made of lead. The very same aqueducts that bring life minus giving water are also potentially leaching a slow, insidious poison into the population. The Roman elite, who could afford lead pipes in their homes and who drank wine sweetened with the syrup boiled in lead pots, were getting a much higher dose. Some historians have argued, though it's a hotly debated topic, that widespread, low-level lead poisoning could have contributed to the fall of the empire by causing cognitive decline, infertility, and general ill health among the ruling class. This debate rages on, with many scholars now thinking the effects were probably overstated, but the lead was undeniably there. The contradictions continue in the realm of personal hygiene. You visit a bustling marketplace and see a vendor selling small, elegant pots of a special paste. He advertises it as a fantastic tooth-minus whitener, guaranteed to give you a brilliant, dazzling smile. You lean in, curious about the ingredients. He tells you the secret is a special import from Portugal. It's stale, aged urine. You recoil, but he explains with the confident air of a seasoned salesman that Portuguese urine is the most potent and powerful in the world, making it the best for cleaning and whitening to gas. And, of course, for oral hygiene, the ammonia in the urine acted as a powerful cleansing agent. So while the Romans were masters of large-scale sanitation, their concept of personal chemistry could be profoundly strange. People would swish fermented urine around in their mouths like a modern mouthwash, believing it was the height of dental care. Imagine the scent at a high-minus society dinner party. This leads you to the public baths, the very heart of Roman social life. You pay a small fee and enter a vast, echoing complex of warm rooms, hot pools, and cold plunges. It feels wonderfully civilized that as you look around, you notice the tools for personal cleaning. The Romans didn't use soap for washing the body. Instead, they would cover themselves in oil and then use a special curved metal scraper, called a strigil, to scrape the oil, sweat, and dirt off their skin. The resulting gunk, a mixture of oil, dirt, and human sweat, was called glow, and it was highly prized. This personal grime, scraped from the bodies of famous gladiators or athletes, was considered a luxury item. It was collected and sold in little pots as a hymen, a scent face cream or an ointment for aches and pains. The belief was that by rubbing a famous athlete's sweat onto your skin, you could absorb some of his strength and vitality. So you have this society that has brilliantly engineered a system to bring clean water and untake dirty water out on a massive scale. They built a world that was, in many ways, far cleaner than the European cities that would follow. Yet, in the same breath, they were poisoning themselves with their plumbing, washing their mouths with pee, and rubbing celebrity sweat on their faces as a beauty treatment. Academics have long struggled with this duality. Were the Romans public health geniuses, or were they just good plumbers who got lucky? Did they truly understand the connection between filth and disease, or were they simply driven by a cultural love for cleanliness, order, and the luxurious comfort of the baths? There is no clear answer. They seem to understand some things intuitively, like not camping near stagnant water, but missed others completely. They didn't have a germ theory of disease. They believed sickness came from miasma, or bad air, rising from swamps and other foul-smelling places. This belief was actually helpful in a way, as it encouraged them to build away from smelly, swampy areas, which also happened to be breeding grounds for malaria. They carrying mosquitoes. They were doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason. You leave the baths, walking down a street that is cleaner than any you will see for the next millennium. You pass a public fountain, its water flowing through lead pipes. You see a woman smile, her teeth unnaturally white. The Roman approach to health was a jumble of brilliant engineering and bizarre personal habits, of practical wisdom and profound misunderstanding. It was a world that was simultaneously advanced and deeply, weirdly, wrong, and as you watch the sun set over the 7 hills, you get the sense that this magnificent, contradictory world cannot last forever. The world around you crumbles. It happens not in a single, fiery cataclysm, but as a slow, grinding decay. The legions have retreated. The tax collectors no longer come, and the great stone roads are cracked and overgrown with weeds. The aqueducts, those magnificent arteries of the empire, have been broken or have simply silted up. The clean water ceases to flow. The public baths are now empty, echoing ruins. The grand system that, for all its flaws, held the world together has dissolved into 1,000 fractured pieces. Life has become smaller, more local, and infinitely more dangerous. You find yourself sick in this new, darker age, a nagging ache in your joints, a fever that comes and goes. The confident, arrogant voice of Galen is a distant echo from a lost civilization. There are no grand clinics, no famous surgeons. So where do you go for help? You follow the whispers, the rumors of the only places where order, learning, and a semblance of the old world still survive the monasteries. After a long journey through a wild and untamed landscape, you see it, a stone wall, rising strong and solid against the chaos. You knock on a heavy wooden gate, and a monk, face framed by a simple woolen hood, lets you in. The moment the gate closes behind you, the world changes. The noise and fear of the outside world fall away, replaced by an almost supernatural quiet. Here, inside the cloister, Life is governed by the rhythm of bells, prayer, and work. You are taken to the infirmary, a simple, clean building set aside for the sick. The monk in charge, the infirmarian, is not a proud physician puffed up with his own genius. He is a humble man who sees his work as a sacred duty. His diagnostic tools are threefold prayer, the inherited texts of the ancients, and the garden just outside his window. He examines you, his touch gentle. He still speaks the language of Galen, filtered through a new lens of Christian faith. Yes, your humors are out of balance, he might say, but why are they imbalanced? Perhaps it is a test from God, a trial to strengthen your spirit. Perhaps it is a temptation from the devil, seeking to turn you away from faith. The cure, therefore, cannot just be physical, it must also be spiritual. Your prescription will include prayers to be said at certain hours and perhaps a period of quiet contemplation. Then, he leads you outside, into the monastery's most important medical facility, the herb garden, or hortules. It is a small, perfectly ordered square of earth, divided into neat beds by narrow paths. Here, the monk cultivates the tools of his trade: chamomile for calming the stomach, rosemary to aid memory, fennel to ease coughs. This is the mainstream medical knowledge of the day. Monasteries across Europe had these gardens and exchanged seeds and knowledge, creating a network of living pharmacies. But the monk's understanding of these plants is different from a modern botanist's. He shows you a plant with spotted leaves, vaguely resembling a diseased lung. This, he says, holding up a stalk of lungwort, is for afflictions of the chest. He then points to a small, delicate flower with a pattern that looks like a tiny human eye. That is eyebright. It is for ailments of the vision. This is the doctrine of signatures, a belief that God, in his infinite wisdom, had marked his creation with clue signatures to show humanity how they should be used. It was a form of divine labeling. A plant with a kidney-shaped leaf must be for kidney problems. A plant with a reddish sap must be good for the blood. It was a medical system based on visual puns and faith. This wasn't just some fringe folk belief. It was a widely accepted principle for centuries. After selecting the appropriate herbs based on their divine signs, the monk takes you to the scriptorium. It is a quiet room where other monks sit hunched over desks, painstakingly copying manuscripts. And this is the true miracle of the monastery. They are copying the Bible, yes, but they are also copying Galen, Hippocrates, and other classical authors. The fragile papier scrolls of the old world are being transcribed onto durable vellum, preserving a flickering flame of knowledge through the dark centuries. Without these tireless, anonymous scribes, most of what the Greeks and Romans knew about medicine would have been lost forever. However, historians still argue about the nature of this preservation. Were the monks true scholars, understanding and analyzing the texts they copied, or were they simply human photocopiers, faithfully reproducing words they may not have fully grasped, sometimes even introducing errors that would then be duplicated for generations? Some argue they curated and sanitized the knowledge, leaving out parts of classical texts that conflicted with Christian doctrine. They were not scientists pushing knowledge forward, but archivists, desperately clinging to the wisdom of a superior past. The monk returns with your medicine, a simple herbal tea and a poultice to be applied to your aching joints. The ingredients were chosen by a mix of inherited Roman knowledge and the divine logic of the doctrine of signatures. As you drink the warm, bitter liquid, you realize that medicine has fundamentally changed. It is no longer a science of bold experimentation and anatomical discovery. It has become an act of faith, a ritual of preservation. You are in a safe place, a sanctuary of peace and learning, but the world of medicine has shrunk, and its gaze has turned from the human body to ancient texts and the heavens above. And in this new world, stranger beliefs are beginning to take root. The peaceful, ordered world of the monastery provides some comfort, but it isn't a cure. Your joints feel better, but as the seasons turn, a new and more insidious problem begins to creep in. It starts subtly. You find yourself asking people to repeat themselves. The chirping of crickets at dusk seems to fade, and the clear, ringing sound of the monastery bells becomes dull and distant. As if heard through a thick blanket, your world is slowly being muffled. The volume turned down day by day. You mention it to the infirmarian monk. He nods gravely, his face etched with concern. He consults his treasured, hand-copied Latin texts. To him, this is not a matter of nerves or damaged eardrums. It is, once again, a question of humors. He explains that your ears are likely being blocked by an excess of cold and wet humor's thick, sticky phlegm, perhaps that has seeped into the channels of your head and congealed there. The logical cure, according to the wisdom of Galen, is to apply things that are hot and dry to counteract the cold and wet. So begins a regimen of gentle, scholarly treatments. The monk has you lie down while he carefully drips warm olive oil into your ear canal. He prepares poultices of dried, warming herbs like chamomile and rosemary, which you hold against your ear for hours. He might even have you stand over a steaming bowl of water infused with vinegar, hoping the hot, acidic vapors will travel up into your sinuses and dry out the offending blockage. It all feels very sensible, very calm, and it does absolutely nothing. The silence deepens, the frustration mounts. You feel increasingly isolated, sealed inside your own head. The monk, seeing his official remedies fail, eventually shrugs with a sigh of compassionate resignation. His knowledge has reached its limit. So you turn away from the world of Latin texts and formal learning and venture into the village nearby, into the older, wilder world of folk magic. You seek out the local wise woman. She's an old woman who lives in a small cottage that smells of wood smoke and drying herbs. She doesn't talk of humors. She talks of spirits, of earthy forces, of sympathies. She listens to your problem, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Then she nods. She knows a cure for this, but it is a strange one. The solution to your problem, she tells you, is a weasel. You stare at her, bewildered. She explains the logic, a logic as ancient as the hills around you. It's the logic of what we now call sympathetic magic. A weasel is a creature of immense power. It is slender, quick, and fearless. It can slit through the narrowest of cracks, dart into burrows, and chase its prey relentlessly. Therefore, its very nature, its essence, is to get into tight spaces and clear things out. If you have a blockage in the tiny tunnel of your ear, what better spiritual force to call upon than that of a weasel? The question, of course, is how you get the weasel ness into your ear. The method is the stuff of nightmares for a modern mind, but to her, it is powerful medicine. The weasel must be prepared. The most common method involves burning the animal to ash, then mixing those ashes with lard or oil to create a dark, gritty salve. This salve is then carefully packed into your ear. Another, more elaborate version might involve boiling the weasel down until its fat can be rendered uncollected, then dripping the warm weasel fat into the ear canal. The idea is that the potent, channel clearing spirit of the animal will be transferred directly to the site of your affliction. This wasn't some isolated, crackpot village belief. This idea had surprisingly deep roots. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, in his famous Encyclopedia Natural History, a book that was revered as a source of all knowledge throughout the Middle Ages, listed countless remedies derived from animals. He was a great believer in the idea that nature provided cures for every ailment, if one only knew where to look. His work was a chaotic jumble of fact and bizarre folklore, and it was from sources like this that such animal-based cures gained an air of ancient authority. So, which path did medieval medicine really follow? This is a question historians still actively puzzle over. Was there a clear dividing line between the official medicine of the university trained, Latin speaking doctors and the folk medicine of the village healers? Or was the boundary incredibly porous? For a long time, it was thought that they were two separate, competing traditions, that more and more, academics believe they were constantly bleeding into one another. A desperate patient like you wouldn't care if the cure came from a book or a weasel. You'd try both. A doctor, having exhausted his humoral remedies, might have privately mumbled, "Well, you could always try what old Goody Smith suggests." The wise minus woman finishes her preparation. Use it, tense and uncertain, as she applies the strange, dark poultice to your ear. It doesn't hurt. It's just deeply, profoundly weird. You are told to leave it in overnight and let the spirit of the weasel do its work. As you walk back to the monastery under the moon, the world still muffled and distant, you are a walking embodiment of the medieval medical mind. One ear has been treated with the high minus-minded, rational minus but minus wrong theories of ancient Greece, and the other is now plugged with the essence of a wild animal, based on a logic that is both poetic and utterly divorced from reality. You sit on the edge of your cot, listening to the silence, and hope that somewhere between the phlegm and the weasel, the cure might be found. The weasel cure, unsurprisingly, does not work. You are left with a lingering smell of burnt fur in your memory and the same frustrating, muffled silence in your ears. The world of faith minus, based in folk remedies, has failed you. You need something more direct. As you wander through a bustling medieval town, a splash of bright color catches your eye. It's a red and white striped pole outside a shop. In this era, that's not the sign of a candy store. It's the sign of a barber. And, in the Middle Ages, a barber is much more than just a man who cuts hair. You push open the door and step into a small, crowded room. It smells of soap, tear, and faintly of iron. Men sit on benches, waiting their turn, gossiping about the price of wool and the latest scandal at court. The barber himself is a whirlwind of activity. He is a craftsman, a tradesman, a man of the people. He doesn't read Latin texts or contemplate the celestial spheres. He works with his hands, and his tools are sharp. He is a barber minus surgeon. For centuries, a strange division had grown in the world of medicine. The doctors, who were often university minus educated and sometimes members of the clergy, considered themselves intellectuals. They diagnosed. They theorized about humors. They prescribed diets and herbal remedies. But they considered cutting into the human body to be beneath them. It was messy, manual labor. So, the actual, physical work of surgery, the lancing of boils, the setting of fractures, the pulling of teeth, and the all-minus important practice of bloodletting was outsourced to men like this. Barbers, with their steady hands and collection of sharp razors, were the natural candidates. You watch him at work. He finishes trimming a merchant's beard with a flourish. His next customer points to a swollen, painful minus-looking tooth. The barber nods, pulls out a terrifying minus-looking pair of iron forceps, tells the man to grip the arms of the chair, and with a swift, brutal yank, extracts the offending molar. There is no anesthetic. Of course, just a swig of strong ale for courage and a leather strap to bite down on. The man groans, spits a stream of blood into a bucket, and pays the barber a coin. It's rough, but it's effective. This is where the iconic barber pole comes from. Historians have a few theories about its origins, and it's a topic of some light-hearted debate. The most popular theory is that the pole itself represents the staff that a patient would grip to make their veins bulge for bloodletting. The white stripes represent the bandages, and the red stripes represent the blood. The brass bowl at the top symbolized the basin used to collect the blood, and the one at the bottom, the basin for catching leeches. It was a graphic, 3-dimensional advertisement for the main services offered within. You decide to take a chance. While he can't fix your hearing, you've developed a nasty boil on your arm, a painful, red lump that throbs with every beat of your heart. You show it to the barber minus surgeon. He examines it with a professional eye, touched sympathetically, and agrees it needs lancing. He wipes a wicked minus looking blade on a piece of cloth. A piece of cloth he just used to wipe down the counter and prepares for the procedure. This is the great paradox of the barber minus surgeon. They were often incredibly skilled in a practical sense. Through sheer repetition, they became experts at certain procedures. They could set a broken bone far more effectively than a university doctor who had only ever read about it in Galen. But their understanding of what caused disease was non-existent. The concept of germs, infection, and sterilization was centuries away. The very tools that could bring relief could also introduce deadly bacteria into the body. Surgery was a roll of the dice. You might be cured of your ailment, or you might die a week later from a raging infection. Here's a curious detail of their trade in some places. Barber minus surgeons formed powerful guilds, and their skills were specialized. Their work interact calcarees, itinerant specialists who would travel from town to town, claiming they could cure blindness. Their procedure involved using a special needle to push the clouded lens of the eye out of the way. It sometimes worked, restoring a degree of blurry vision, but just as often resulted in permanent blindness or infection. There were also lithotomists, specialists in the incredibly painful procedure of cutting for the stone, removing bladder stones through an incision in the perineum without anesthetic. The speed of the surgeon was the only mercy. A good one could complete the entire operation in under a minute. The barber minus surgeon sees you looking nervously at his unminus sanitized blade. He offers you a reassuring smile. To him, the danger is not invisible microbes on his knife. The danger is the bad humor, the pus that is trapped inside you. Releasing it is the only important thing. He is quick and efficient. There is a moment of sharp, intense pain as he lances the boil, followed by an immediate sense of relief as the pressure is released. He cleans the wound, slaps on a simple dressing of cloth and lard, and tells you to keep it clean. You leave the shop with a throbbing arm. Stepping back out into the muddy street, you feel a strange mix of gratitude and terror. You have received care that was immediate, practical, and affordable, but you have also glimpsed a world of medicine completely detached from theory, a world of pure, unsterilized craft. You have placed your trust not in a learned scholar, wise minus woman, but in a man of razors and steel. Now, all you can do is wait and see whether the cut or the cure will win out. Your landstorm throbs, a dull, persistent ache that reminds you of your recent visit to the barber minus surgeon. You did what he said. You kept the wound clean, but it's now red and hot to the touch. A worrying warmth is spreading from the incision. In a panic, you go back to a more respectable physician, a man who has actually been to a university and read the ancient books. You show him your inflamed arm. He shakes his head gravely. The barber, he mutters, was too aggressive. He has disturbed the humors, causing a rush of hot, angry blood to the sight. The balance must be restored. He looks at your face, which is flushed with fever and anxiety. Your pulse is racing. He sees all the classic signs of an excess of the sanguine humor. The cure, in his mind, is obvious and immediate. You have too much blood. You need to get rid of some. Before you can protest, he opens a wooden box. Inside, nestled in damp moss, is a wriggling, squirming collection of dark, slimy creatures, leeches, for the next 1,000 years. From the fall of Rome to the dawn of the modern era, these little blood-sucking worms will be one of the single most common medical tools in Europe. The doctor explains the logic to you with the patient air of a teacher. This is not some crude, folk remedy. This is high medicine, straight from the pages of Galen. The leeches, he tells you, will perform a gentler, more natural, and more targeted form of bloodletting than the barber's crude blade. They will draw out the bad blood directly from the afflicted area, reducing the inflammation and calming the fever. He plucks a few of the larger leeches from the box and places them on the red, swollen skin of your arm. You flinch as you feel their strange, rasping mouths attach. Each leech has 3 jaws, arranged in a Y- shape, and each jaw is lined with about 100 tiny, sharp teeth. As they bite down, it feels like a series of sharp pinpricks. But then, almost immediately, the pain fades. This is the leech's first trick. Its saliva is a cocktail of powerful diochemicals. It contains a strong anesthetic, which numbs the area so its host doesn't feel the bite and brush it off. Then comes the second, more important trick. As the leech begins to feed, it injects an anticoagulant called hirudin into your bloodstream. This is the key to its success as a medical tool. Hirudin is an incredibly powerful substance that prevents blood from clotting. This allows the leech to drink its fill uninterrupted, and it means that after the leech is removed, the wound will continue to ooze blood for hours, extending the therapeutic bleeding effect. You lie there, watching in a kind of morbid fascination as the leeches swell up, their bodies growing plump and dark with your blood. They can consume up to 10 times their own body weight in a single feeding. This practice was so common that doctors and apothecaries had special jars, often beautifully decorated porcelain, called leech jars, specifically for keeping their precious supply. They even had specific techniques for application. If a leech was reluctant to bite, the doctor might smear the area with milk or sugar to entice it, or even prick the skin to provide a drop of blood as an appetizer. The use of leeches reached its absolute zenith in the early 19th century, a period known as leech mania, particularly in France. The physician François Inès Joseph Victor Broussais was a champion of the practice, believing that almost all diseases were a form of local inflammation that required aggressive leeching. His influence led to France importing tens of millions of leeches a year to satisfy the medical demand. Entire ponds and swamps were cultivated as leech farms to raise the valuable creatures. But where do academics stand on this? Was leeching just another useless and dangerous medieval practice? The answer is surprisingly complex. For centuries, historians dismissed it as pure quackery. But, in a strange twist, modern medicine has rediscovered the leech. Today, leeches are used in sterile, controlled settings in microsurgery, when a surgeon reattaches a severed finger. For example, it's easier to stitch the arteries together than the delicate veins. Blood can get into the finger, but it can't get out, leading to swelling and tissue death. By applying a leech, surgeons can use that powerful anticoagulant, hirudin, to relieve the venous congestion, keeping the blood flowing until the body can regrow its own veins. The medieval doctors were using the right tool, but for all the wrong reasons and on all the wrong problems. The physician carefully removes the swollen leeches from your arm. They are now fat and sluggish. He places them in a separate bowl. They won't be used again until they've fully digested their meal, which could take months. Your arm is now bleeding freely from the tiny Y-shaped cuts. The doctor covers it with a light dressing and tells you to rest. You do feel a little light-headed, and perhaps the throbbing has eased slightly, or maybe you're just too woozy to notice. You have just experienced the single most common medical procedure of the pre-modern world. You have been bled by a worm, a creature seen as a living, breathing pharmaceutical device, perfectly designed by nature to rebalance your faulty humors. The leeching doesn't help. The infection in your arm, a consequence of an unsterilized blade, is now a serious problem. The fever returns with a vengeance, and you grow weak. The university physician, seeing his humoral remedies fail, throws up his hands. The barber-surgeon is afraid to touch you again. The folk healer has run out of animals to burn. You are running out of options. In this era, when the limits of medicine are so quickly reached, where do you turn? You turn to God. Your illness is now diagnosed. It is no longer a simple matter of a bad humor or a poorly lanced boil. It is a spiritual crisis. Perhaps it is a punishment for a sin you have committed, or perhaps it is a profound test of your faith. The only remaining path to a cure is not through medicine, but through a miracle. And to get a miracle, you must go on a pilgrimage. Across Europe, certain places are believed to be touched by the divine. A cathedral that houses the bone of a saint, a shrine where a holy martyr was executed, a remote chapel where the Virgin Mary was said to have appeared. These places are hotspots of sacred power, spiritual wells where a desperate soul can appeal directly to heaven for an intervention. You decide to seek out the shrine of a particularly powerful saint, one known for his prowess in curing fevers and afflictions of the flesh. Your friends help you prepare for the journey. It's a slow, arduous process. You travel on foot, or perhaps, given your weakness, on the back of a cart. The roads are terrible, and bandits are a constant threat. But you are not alone. You join a stream of other pilgrims, a river of human hope and misery flowing across the landscape. There are blind men being led by their children, people with withered limbs, those afflicted with the terrifying skin disease known as street, ants and as fire. Each person is a story of suffering, and each is walking towards the same sliver of hope. After weeks of travel, you finally arrive. The town around the shrine is bustling, a medieval version of a tourist trap. Vendors sell pilgrim badges, cheap metal tokens that you can pin to your hat to show where you've been. Others sell tertiary relic strips of cloth that have been touched to the main relic for those who can't get close enough to the real thing. There are food stalls, lodging houses, and a fair share of pickpockets and charlatans. But then you enter the cathedral itself. Then the commercial clamor falls away. The air inside is cool and vast, thick with the smell of incense and beeswax candles. Light filters through stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in jewels of red and blue. The space is designed to make you feel small, to lift your eyes and your spirit upwards. You join the queue of supplicants, inching your way towards the high altar. Then there, displayed in a magnificent, jewel-encrusted container called a reliquary, is the reason you have come all this way. It might be a fragment of bone from a saint's finger, a piece of the true cross, or a vial said to contain the blood of a martyr. To the modern eye, it's a macabre and slightly unsettling display, but to you and everyone else in this line, it is a direct, physical link to heaven. It is a conduit of divine power. This belief in the power of relics was an absolutely central part of medieval life. It wasn't just superstition. It was theology. The idea was that the soul of a saint was in heaven, but a spark of their spiritual energy, their holiness, remained in their earthly remains. To be in the presence of the relic, to touch it, or even just to see it, was to be in the presence of that power. Of course, this led to a booming and often fraudulent trade in relics. The authenticity of most relics was, to put it mildly, questionable. As the old saying went, there were enough pieces of the true cross in European cathedrals to build a ship. Skulls of John the Baptist were claimed by multiple churches. Historians still debate how much cynicism was involved. Did the church leaders knowingly promote fake relics for fame and profit? Or did they, and the pilgrims, operate within a system of genuine, fervent belief where the story and the symbol were more important than literal authenticity? It's a question with no simple answer. Many scholars argue that for the average pilgrim, belief was the mechanism that made it work. If you truly believed the bone you were seeing belonged to the saint, then for you, the miracle was possible. Finally, it is your turn. A priest guides you forward. You are allowed to kneel before the reliquary. Perhaps you are even allowed, for a moment, to press your forehead or your afflicted arm against the cold glass and metal of the container. You pour out your heart in a desperate, silent prayer. You confess your sins. You beg the saint to intercede on your behalf, to ask God to lift this curse from you, to grant you a miracle. You stumble back from the altar, your body still weak, but your spirit alight with a fragile hope. Many people claim to have been cured at these shrines. Some of these were likely cases of misdiagnosis, or illnesses that would have resolved on their own. Others were undoubtedly the result of the powerful placebo effect, where profound belief can trigger real physiological changes in the body. If you had walked 100 miles, spent all your money, and focused all your mental and spiritual energy on this single moment, the psychological impact would be immense. You find a quiet corner in the cathedral to rest. You don't know if a miracle will happen, but in a world where medicine has failed, you have done the only thing left to do. You have given your suffering over to a higher power, placing your faith not in a fallible doctor or a questionable folk remedy, but in the finger bone of a long-minus dead holy man. Your pilgrimage ends, and you return home. Your body still weak, your arm still a source of pain. The miracle you prayed for did not materialize in a flash of divine light. You are left once again in the quiet hands of the university-trained physician. He is a man of books and charts, and having seen prayer and relics fail, he returns to what he knows: the intricate, complex, and deeply flawed system of medieval medical theory. He is still convinced your problem is humoral, but he needs to refine his approach. He can't just keep bleeding you at random. The timing must be perfect. He unrolls a large, beautifully illustrated parchment. It is one of the most common and essential medical diagrams of the Middle Ages, the Zodiac Man, or Homo Signorum. It's an image of a human figure, often looking rather vulnerable and exposed, with lines connecting various parts of his body to the symbols of the 12 astrological signs. The physician explains it to you as if it's the most obvious thing in the world: the human body. He tells you, is a microcosm, a little universe that mirrors the great universe, the macrocosmist. Just as the planets and stars move through the heavens, their influence ebbs and flows, affecting the world below, and each part of your body is ruled by a specific celestial sign. Aries, the ram, governs your head. Taurus, the bull, rules your neck and throat. Gemini, the twins, controls your arms and shoulders. The line of influence travels down your body, all the way to Pisces, the fish, which holds dominion over your feet. This means that medical treatment cannot be undertaken lightly. Before performing any procedure, especially one that involves a blade-like surgery or bloodletting, a physician must consult the heavens. He needs to know the current position of the moon. The moon, as it travels through the sky, passes through each of the 12 zodiac signs, and it is considered extremely dangerous to cut into a part of the body when the moon is in the sign that rules it. So if your problem is your arm, as it is now, the doctor must check his almanac. Your arms are ruled by Gemini. If the moon is currently in the sign of Gemini, he will absolutely refuse to let blood from your arm or perform any surgery on it. To do so would be to invite disaster, as the malign influence of the moon would be directed straight into the wound. You would have to wait for days, or even a week or two, until the moon has moved on to a more favorable sign, like Sagittarius or Aquarius, which are considered to have a more benign relationship with Gemini. This wasn't some fringe belief. This was standard medical practice for centuries. Medical textbooks included these charts, and doctors were required to learn the principles of astrology. It was a mandatory part of the curriculum at the best medical schools in Europe. A physician who ignored the stars was considered not just foolish, but negligent. One of the strangest outgrowths of this belief was the creation of a whole category of lucky and unlucky days for medical procedures, known as election astrology. For example, certain days of the year were deemed Egyptian days, or dismal days, considered so unlucky that one should avoid starting any important venture, including undergoing surgery, getting married, or even setting out on a journey. These beliefs were ancient, tracing back to Egyptian and Roman traditions of divination. Historians have long debated the function of this astrological medicine. Was it pure superstition, a massive, systemic delusion that actively harmed patients by delaying necessary treatments? In many cases, yes, a patient with an acute condition needing immediate attention might have to wait for the moon to be in a safe position, potentially with fatal consequences. However, some academics offer a more charitable interpretation. They argue that in an age with no anesthetics and a high risk of infection, Any system that encouraged doctors to hesitate before cutting into someone might have, paradoxically, saved lives. It forced a cooling off period. It made surgery a last resort, something to be undertaken only when all conditions were perfect, both in the patient and in the heavens. It was a system of ritualized caution. Your doctor pulls out his astrolabe and his almanac, a complex chart of planetary movements. He makes his calculations, his brow furrowed in concentration. He notes the position of the sun, the moon, and the visible planets. He mutters to himself about Jupiter being in a favorable aspect, but Mars being a cause for concern. It is a complex, esoteric science, a blend of astronomy, mathematics, and pure magical thinking. Finally, he looks up. The news is not good. The moon will be entering Gemini in 2 days, but in about a week, they will have moved into Leo. Leo rules the heart and back, and is a fiery sign. This, he reasons, would be a good, powerful time to apply a hot and dry remedy to your arm to counteract the cold and wet infection. So he tells you to come back in a week. He will perform the bloodletting then. You leave the physician's study feeling bewildered. The fate of your infected arm, you now understand, does not depend on the urgency of your condition. It depends on the silent, distant dance of the moon through a series of imaginary celestial pictures. Your health is subject to a cosmic timetable. It is a profoundly humbling and deeply unsettling realization. For now, all you can do is wait for the stars to align. The week passes in a haze of fever and anxiety. You wait for the moon to move to its astrologically approved position. But as you wait, the world outside your window begins to change. A new and terrifying rumor is slithering through the towns and villages. A whisper that travels faster than any pilgrim or merchant. It speaks of a sickness, a pestilence so swift and so deadly it feels like the wrath of God himself. They call it the Great Mortality. We call it the Black Death. It arrives in your town not as a conquering army, but silently, carried in the blood of fleas tucked into the fur of rats, scurrying down the ropes of a docked trading ship. At first, it's just a few isolated cases. A sailor, a dock worker. Then, suddenly, it is everywhere. The familiar rhythms of life collapse into chaos and terror. The church bells, which once chimed the hours for prayer, now toll constantly for the dead, until there is no one left with the strength or the will to pull the ropes. The disease is a grotesque spectacle of suffering. People are struck down with sudden fevers, trials, and vomiting. Then come the tale-tale signs, the buboes. Swollen, painful lumps, sometimes the size of an apple, that appear in the groin, armpits, or neck, the sites of the lymph nodes. These are followed by dark patches on the skin, caused by internal bleeding, which likely gave the plague its grim name. Death usually follows within days. You huddle in your home, terrified. The astrological charts and humoral theories of your physician seem like a child's game in the face of this overwhelming horror. The doctors are as helpless and terrified as everyone else. They have never seen anything like it. They try their usual remedies, bloodletting, purging, herbal concoctions, but nothing works. The plague scythes through the population, utterly indifferent to their medicine. Desperate for an explanation, the medical faculty at the University of Paris, the most prestigious in Europe, is commissioned by the King of France to determine the cause. After long deliberation, they issue their official report. The plague, they conclude, was caused by a rare and malevolent conjunction of 3 planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius in the year 1345. This celestial event, they claimed, had drawn up corrupting vapors from the earth, creating a miasma, a poisonous fog that had spread across the world, killing all in its path. It was an explanation born of desperation, clinging to the familiar logic of astrology and bad air because the true cause was too small, too alien, to even be imagined. This miasma theory leads to a host of desperate and strange preventative measures. You see people walking around with their faces buried in bunches of sweet-smelling flowers or herbs, called posies. The rhyme ring around the rosy. A pocketful of posies is often, though likely incorrectly, linked by folklorists to this practice, the rosy being the rash, the posies being the herbs to ward off the bad air. People burn aromatic woods, like juniper and ash, in their homes to purify the atmosphere. They ring bells and fire cannons, hoping the loud noises will shatter and disperse the poisoned air. Here's a truly bizarre public health measure that was enacted in some cities because they believed the plague was spread by this corrupted air. They outlawed bathing. It was thought that warm water opened up the pores of the skin, making it easier for the deadly miasma to enter the body. Personal hygiene, which was already declining after the fall of Rome, hit an all-time low. People were encouraged to cover themselves in a protective layer of their own grime. And then there were the dietary restrictions. Doctors advised against eating juicy fruits, oily foods, or anything that was thought to produce wet humors, as this would make the body more susceptible to the damp, corrupting miasma. Roasting figs and peeling nuts before eating became a matter of life and death in some people's minds. Historians still marvel at the sheer scale of the devastation. In the space of just a few years, the Black Death may have killed between 30% and 60% of Europe's entire population. It was a demographic catastrophe that reshaped society, but the debate that continues among scholars is about its long-term effects. Some argue that by creating a massive labor shortage, the plague ironically led to better wages and more power for the surviving peasants, helping to break down the old feudal system. Others focus on the profound psychological trauma, arguing it led to a more pessimistic and morbid culture, obsessed with death and the Last Judgment. In the midst of the chaos, you hear about a cure, not from a doctor, but from a desperate neighbor. It's called the Vickery method. You are to take a healthy chicken, pluck the feathers from its backside, and strap the live bird's rear end to your swollen boob OS. The theory was that the chicken, a creature of the earth, would draw the pestilence out of your body into its own. When the chicken sickened and died, it was a sign the poison was being extracted. You would then repeat the process with another chicken, and another, until one finally survived, indicating you are cured. You watch from your window as the death carts roll down the street, piled high with bodies. You smell the smoke of the bonfires. You hear the endless tolling of the bells. Every medical theory you've encountered on your journey from the humors of Hippocrates to the astrological charts of the zodiac man has been proven utterly useless. In this terrifying new world, strapping a live chicken to your body seems no more or less logical than anything else. All the old certainties have died. You survive, by sheer dumb luck. You are one of the fortunate ones who never fell ill. Or perhaps you had a mild case and recovered. The great wave of pestilence recedes, leaving a shattered, eerily quiet world in its wake. Society slowly begins to stitch itself back together, but it is forever changed, haunted by the memory of the plague. And in this new, post-plague world, a new and iconic figure emerges from the smoke and fear, the plague doctor. You see one striding down the street one day, and it's a sight you will never forget. He is a figure of grim authority, instantly recognizable and deeply unsettling. He is covered from head to toe in heavy, waxed leather garments, a long coat, gloves, leggings, and a wide-brimmed hat. It's a primitive form of a hazmat suit, designed to protect every inch of his skin from contact with the sick or the dreaded miasma. But it is the mask that truly defines him. He wears a balls or beaked mask, with round glass eyepieces that make him look like a monstrous, otherworldly bird. The beak, which extends about 6 inches from his face, is not for show. It has a very specific and very fragrant purpose. Before he enters the home of a plague victim, he stuffs the tip of this beak with a potent mixture of aromatic herbs and spices. This concoction, known as the Riek, the same name as Galen's old cure minus all, might include ambergris, mint, cloves, camphor, rose petals, and laudanum. The logic behind the bird mask is a direct extension of the miasma theory. If the plague is caused by poisonous air, then the only way to survive is to breathe filtered or purified air. The doctor believed that the powerful, pleasant smells of the herbs in his beak would counteract or neutralize the deadly plague vapors before they could enter his lungs. He was, in effect, walking around inside his own personal cloud of potpourri, a portable air purifier strapped to his face. To complete the ensemble, he carries a long wooden cane. This is not for support. It is a tool of the trade, used to examine patients from a distance, to push aside their bedclothes, or even to direct family members on how to move the sick, all without having to make physical contact. But who were these plague doctors? Here we encounter a common historical misconception. This iconic beak costume was not actually widespread during the Great Wave of the Black Death in the mid-14th century. That imagery comes later. The costume is generally attributed to a French physician named Charles d'Ormy, who developed it in 1619, to be used during subsequent outbreaks of the plague in the 17th century. The image we associate with the medieval Black Death is actually from the early modern period. So what about the doctors during the original 14th century pandemic? They were often not the most respected physicians. In many towns, when the plague hit, the established, wealthy doctors fled to their country estates. The men who stayed behind to tend to the sick were often second-rate physicians, young doctors trying to make a name for themselves, or even individuals with no formal medical training at all who were simply willing to take the risk. They were municipal employees, hired by towns and cities on a special contract to treat plague victims exclusively. Their job was brutal and grim. It involved diagnosing the sick, which was usually straightforward, and offering what little comfort they could. But their most important function was often not medical, but administrative. They were record minus keepers. They tallied the dead, witnessed last wills and testaments, and performed autopsies, not for scientific research in the way we think of it, but to confirm that the death was indeed from plague, for the public record. One of the strangest things they did involved the buboes, those painful, swollen lymph nodes, following the old logic of releasing bad humors from the body. Doctors believed that the plague poison was concentrated in these swellings. Therefore, they had to be opened. Plague doctors would lance the buboes with a knife, just as the barber-surgeon lanced your boil. Then, to draw out the poison, they would apply a poultice. One popular recipe for this poultice was a mixture of figs, cooked onions, and yeast. Another, far more bizarre treatment, was to take a dried toad and lay it on the bubo. It was believed the toad would absorb the poison, swelling up before the patient's eyes, and when it was full, it would be replaced by another toad. The debate among historians about the plague doctor is whether they were heroic public servants or opportunistic ghouls. The answer, as always, is complicated. They were paid exceptionally well, often several times the salary of a normal doctor, and were granted special privileges. But the work was incredibly dangerous. Most plague doctors had a very short career and an even shorter life expectancy. They lived in a state of perpetual quarantine, often shunned by the healthy population who saw them as harbingers of death. Some were undoubtedly charlatans who took advantage of the panic, selling useless cures and fake amulets. But others were brave men who, for whatever reason, chose to stay in the midst of unimaginable horror to perform a necessary, if often futile, public service. You watch the beaked figure move down the street, a slow, deliberate specter of death and medicine combined. He is a walking symbol of an age grappling with a catastrophe it cannot understand. His strange, bird-like silhouette is a monument to a flawed theory, a testament to the desperate, fragrant, and fearful measures people will take when the world seems to be ending. The memory of the plague and its bird-faced doctors begins to fade into the background, becoming a part of the landscape of fear. like a dormant volcano that everyone hopes will never erupt again. Life goes on. You find yourself in a world that is slowly, cautiously rebuilding. You've journeyed forward in time, perhaps into the 15th or 16th century. Your hearing is still poor, and you are now troubled by a new ailment. It's not as dramatic as the plague, but it's persistent and disfiguring. The glands in your neck have become swollen and hard, creating lumps that are tender to the touch. Eventually, some of these lumps break open into weeping sores that refuse to heal. You go to a physician. He examines your neck, his face grim. He doesn't mention the plague. He knows what this is. This is scrofula, a form of tuberculosis that affects the lymph nodes in the neck. But he doesn't call it that. He calls it by its common name, the king's evil. And when he tells you this, he doesn't reach for his leech jar or his astrological charts. He tells you that there is only one true cure for this particular disease. It is a cure that cannot be found in any apothecary's shop or surgeon's theater. It is a cure that can only be administered by the monarch himself. You must seek the royal touch. This was one of the longest, lasting, and most widespread medical rituals in European history. For centuries, in both England and France, it was believed that the legitimate, divinely appointed king possessed a miraculous, God given power to heal this specific disease simply by touching the afflicted person. So you begin another kind of pilgrimage, not to a saint's shrine, but to the royal court. The process is formalized, unbureaucratic. You might need a certificate from your local priest or physician to prove that you genuinely have the king's evil and are not just trying to get a free trip to the capital. Once you arrive, you join a massive crowd of other sufferers. The ceremony of the royal touch was a huge public event, sometimes held on major religious feast days. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of sick people would gather in the halls and courtyards of the palace, waiting for their chance to be healed by the king. You finally see him. The king emerges, surrounded by his court, not as a doctor, but as a priest king, a conduit of divine power. A special religious service is held. Then, the sick are brought forward, one by one. You kneel before him. He recites a short prayer. Then, with great solemnity, he reaches out and gently touches your swollen neck and sores. As he does, he might say the words, "The king touches you. God heals you." After the touch, he performs a second ritual. He gives each person a special gold coin, known as a touch piece or an angel. This coin, which had been blessed, was to be worn around the neck on a ribbon. It was considered a vital part of the cure. It was not payment, but a talisman to continue the healing process and prevent the disease from returning. People cherished these coins. There are accounts of people on their deathbeds bequeathing their touch piece to their children, as it was considered an item of immense spiritual value. But where did this incredibly specific belief come from? Historians trace the English tradition back to the 11th century king, Edward the Confessor, who was later made a saint. The French claim their tradition is even older, starting with Clovis I in the 5th century. The longevity of the practice is astonishing. It was performed by nearly every monarch of England and France for over 700 years. Charles II of England supposedly touched nearly 100 Zaro people during his reign. The academic debate around the royal touch is fascinating. Was this a cynical piece of political theater? A brilliant propaganda tool designed to legitimize a monarch's reign? Or was it an act of genuine faith on the part of both the king and his subjects? The consensus is that it was both. For the king, it was a powerful way to demonstrate his divine right to rule. By performing this miracle, he was showing his people that he was God's chosen representative on earth. It was a political act cloaked in religious ceremony. For the common people, who lived in a world where divine intervention was a real and present possibility, it was a genuine source of hope. And here's the odd part: it sometimes seemed to work. Scrofula is a strange disease. It can have periods of remission, where the symptoms spontaneously improve or even disappear for a time before flaring up again. A person could be touched by the king during one of these natural lulls and genuinely believe they had been cured. Furthermore, the power of the placebo effect, especially in such a momentous, emotionally charged ceremony, cannot be underestimated. Even the most intelligent people of the age believed in it. Samuel Johnson, the great 18th century writer and dictionary creator, was afflicted with scrofula as a child. In 1712, he was taken by his mother to London to be touched by Queen Anne, the last British monarch to perform the ceremony. It didn't cure him, he carried the scars his whole life. But the fact that this rational man of the Enlightenment was subjected to this ancient ritual shows how deeply ingrained it was. You leave the palace, clutching your precious gold coin. Your neck is still swollen, the sore is still weak, but you are filled with a profound sense of awe and hope. You have been in the presence of majesty, touched by the hand of God's chosen. You tie the ribbon around your neck and begin the long journey home, believing, praying that the king's touch and the blessed gold will, in time, work their slow, divine magic. The gold angel coin from the king feels cool against your skin, a constant reminder of the majestic, but ultimately ineffective, ceremony. The sores on your neck persist. You feel a growing sense of disillusionment with these grand, external cures, the saint's bone, the king's touch. You yearn for a more personal, more analytical approach. Your journey takes you forward again, into the heart of the Renaissance. It's a time of renewed interest in classical learning, but some old habits die hard. You find yourself in the study of a wealthy, university-trained physician. The room is filled with books and astronomical charts, much like the study of the medieval doctor. But there's a new and curious addition. On a side table rests a row of glass flasks, each containing a liquid of a different color and turbidity. They are filled with urine. You've come to him for a consultation about a general feeling of malaise, a lack of energy that has plagued you for months. The physician listens to your complaints, but he seems distracted. His real interest is not in your story, but in the sample of your urine that you were instructed to bring with you in a small, clear bottle. He doesn't just glance at it. He begins a formal, methodical examination. This is the science of uroscopy, or urine minus gazing, and for centuries, it was the absolute gold standard of medical diagnosis. He holds your flask up to the light, swirling it gently. He is looking at its color. He has a special chart, a urine wheel, which displays up to 20 different colors of urine, from a pale, whitish color of whey to a deep, dark red or even black. Each color corresponds to a different state of the humors inside your body. A pale urine might indicate an excess of cold, watery phlegm. A bright yellow or reddish urine suggests an excess of hot, fiery or yellow bile. Next, he assesses its density. He watches how the light passes through it. Is it thickened cloudy or thin and clear? Are there sediments? He might even let it sit for a while to see how different layers separate out, believing that the top layer corresponds to ailments of the head, the middle to the torso, and the bottom to the kidneys and bladder. Then, he unstoppers the flask and takes a cautious sniff. The odor is another crucial diagnostic clue. A foul smell could indicate a putrefaction or decay of the humors deep within your body. A sweet smell, though they wouldn't know it was a sign of diabetes for centuries, was also noted. And then comes the most intimate, and to our minds, most repulsive part of the examination. The doctor might, if he is a true traditionalist, dip a finger into the flask and taste it. The taste salty, sweet, bitter, or bland was the final piece of the puzzle, confirming the humoral diagnosis suggested by the color and smell. This practice wasn't seen as disgusting. It was seen as the height of scientific medicine. The urine was believed to be a perfect distillation of the state of the four humors in the blood. Since the kidneys filtered the blood, the resulting urine was like a window into the soul, a liquid message from the body's interior. A skilled uroscopist, he claimed he could diagnose everything from a fever to jaundice, and even determine if a woman was pregnant, all without ever touching the patient. He was reading your story in a bottle. The historical debate around uroscopy is about its utility. Was it a completely useless ritual, as it appears to us, or was there a kernel of real medicine hidden within the elaborate folklore? On one hand, it was clearly based on the flawed humoral theory, but on the other, a careful observation of urine can reveal real signs of disease. A very dark urine can indicate liver problems. A cloudy urine can be a sign of a urinary tract infection. Reddish urine can mean blood in the urinary tract. The doctors were seeing real symptoms, that they were interpreting them through a completely wrong theoretical framework. This led to a profession ripe for quackery. Piss prophets, as they were cynically called, would set up stalls in marketplaces. People would bring them a sample, and for a fee, the prophet would make a grand pronouncement about their health. They became so notorious for making diagnoses without even seeing the patient that some medical schools started to push back. The great physician Paracelsus famously mocked uroscopists by supposedly sending them a flask of his horse's urine and then ridiculing their detailed and utterly wrong diagnosis of his condition. A particularly strange and detailed part of uroscopy was its supposed ability to diagnose lover's malady or love sickness. According to the texts, the urine of a person hopelessly in love would be a specific pale, clear color but would have small, floating strands within it, said to be fragments of the pining lover's very substance dissolving away from the heat of their unrequited passion. Your physician completes his examination. He holds your flask up, squints at it, and then turns to his chart. He says with an air of discovery. It is as I suspected. Your urine has the color of pale gold, with a slight turbidity in the middle portion. This indicates a clear imbalance. Your phlegmatic humor is ascendant, leading to this sluggishness and lack of vital heat. His prescription follows logically from this diagnosis. He gives you a list of hot and dry foods to eat: roasted meats, garlic, onions, red wine. He prescribes a warming herbal tonic, perhaps containing ginger or pepper, and he advises you to avoid cold and wet foods like cucumbers, melons, and fish. The entire treatment plan is based not on your lived experience of your symptoms, but on the color and consistency of your bodily fluids after they have left your body. You leave his study with a dietary plan and a sense of wonder. You have just been diagnosed by a man who barely looked at you, but who stared deeply into your waist. It felt scientific, methodical, and deeply personal, all at the same time. You are what you excrete. In the world of Renaissance medicine, this was the simple, observable truth. You follow the urine minus gazer's diet for a while, dutifully eating your hot and dry foods, but you remain stubbornly, sluggishly, unwell. The Renaissance world around you is buzzing with new ideas, a spirit of rebellion against the old ways, and you soon hear whispers of a new kind of doctor. A man who openly mocks the ancient wisdom of Galen and the fussy rituals of the uroscopists. He is a loud, arrogant, and brilliant Swiss-minus German physician who goes by the name of Paracelsus. Finding him is like finding a storm. He doesn't hold court in a quiet, respectable study. You find him in a bustling tavern, drinking with soldiers and merchants, or striding through a mining town, talking to the men who work deep in the earth. He is a rebel, a wanderer who famously declared, "The patients are your textbook, the sickbed is your study." He burned the works of Galen and other classical authorities in a public bonfire, an act of supreme academic arrogance. Paracelsus has a radically different idea about what causes disease. He believes the humoral theory is nonsense. The body, he argues, is not a bag for liquids. It is a chemical laboratory, a microcosm of the universe, made up of three essential principles: salt representing the principle of stability and substance, sulfur representing the principle of transformation and spirit, and Mercury representing the principle of volatility and soul. To him, sickness is not a humoral imbalance, but a chemical one. Something has gone wrong with the archeus, the internal alchemist that governs the body's functions. Because disease is chemical, the cures must also be chemical. Paracelsus scoffs at the gentle herbal remedies of the past. He believes the most potent medicines are not found in the garden, but in the ground. They are minerals and metals, poisons that, if used correctly, could become powerful cures. This is the core of his philosophy. The dose makes the poison. Any substance, he argued, can be a medicine or a poison, depending on the quantity administered. It was a revolutionary idea that is now a foundational principle of toxicology. You manage to get a consultation with this firebrand doctor. He looks at you with piercing eyes, dismisses your urine flask with a wave of his hand, and listens intently to your symptoms. He declares that your sluggishness is caused by a failure of your internal alchemy. You need a stronger, more targeted medicine to jolt the system back into working order. He reaches into his medical kit and produces a small vial of a liquid metal. It's antimony, a toxic metalloid. You look at the vial with horror. Antimony was known as a violent purgative. In large doses, it caused explosive vomiting and diarrhea, and could easily be lethal. But Paracelsus and his followers, known as Paracelsians, created something called antimony cups. These were small cups made from the metal. Wine would be left to stand in the cup overnight, allowing a small, and hopefully not deadly, amount of the antimony to leach into the liquid. This wine was then drunk as a powerful cure minus all, intended to purge the body of all impurities and start its internal chemical processes. Another of his favorite, and equally dangerous, remedies was mercury. He saw it as a powerful tool for cleaning the body from the inside out, particularly for treating the new and terrifying disease that was spreading across Europe, syphilis. His mercury-based cures were often effective at suppressing the symptoms, but they came at a terrible cost. Patients suffered from mercury poisoning, leading to symptoms like tremors, tooth loss, and severe neurological damage. They were rating one slough, debilitating disease for another. Historians are deeply divided on Paracelsus. Was he a revolutionary genius who single-handedly dragged medicine from the ancient world into the modern one? Or was he a dangerous and egotistical quack? Proponents point out that he was one of the first to connect specific diseases to specific occupations, writing a groundbreaking treatise on the diseases of miners, linking their lung ailments to the inhalation of metal dusts. This was the birth of occupational medicine. He championed observation over blind adherence to ancient texts. But his critics argue that his theories were just as mystical and unproven as the humoral theory he replaced. His salt, sulfur, mercury triad was alchemy, not chemistry, and his toxic metal cures, while sometimes effective, were incredibly dangerous and killed countless patients. One of the more peculiar beliefs held by Paracelsus and his followers was the idea of the homunculus, or little man. Paracelsus provided a recipe for creating a living, artificial human. It involved placing human seed in a sealed glass vessel and burying it in warm horse manure for 40 days. During this time, it would begin to form into a tiny, transparent human figure. It would then need to be fed daily with the arcanum of human blood for 40 weeks, after which it would grow into a living child, albeit a much smaller one than a naturally born infant. It was the ultimate alchemical fantasy, a testament to his belief that man could master the chemical secrets of creation itself. Paracelsus gives you a tiny pill, a carefully measured dose of one of his metallic preparations. He tells you to take it and to trust in the power of nature's hidden chemistry. You hold the small, heavy pill in your palm. It feels dangerous, potent. You are being asked to swallow a poison in the hope that it will become a cure. It's a radical departure from the gentle herbal teas of the monastery or the dietary advice of the Euroscopist. You are on the front lines of a medical revolution, a battle between the ancient herbalists and the new, aggressive chemists. and you are the battlefield. You swallow the metallic pill from paracelsus. The effect is violent and immediate, a storm that purges your system, leaving you feeling weak but strangely cleansed. While the chemical theories of paracelsus are a radical new path, you realize they are still based on a profound ignorance of one fundamental thing: the actual physical landscape of the human body. Galen's animal-based anatomy still reigns supreme, and no amount of chemical cures can fix a flawed map. A new kind of curiosity is stirring in the Renaissance era, a desire to see things as they truly are. This curiosity leads you away from the alchemist's workshop and into the shadowy world of the anatomist. You find yourself in Padua, Italy, at one of the most famous medical universities in Europe. Here, a young, brilliant Belgian professor named Andreas Vesalius is about to change medicine forever. But his work is shrouded in secrecy and danger. The dissection of human bodies, while no longer strictly forbidden by the church as is commonly believed, was still heavily restricted and viewed with great public suspicion. The bodies used were typically those of executed criminals. Getting a steady supply was a constant challenge. This led to a grim and clandestine world of body snatching. You find yourself one moonless night, cloaked in shadows, following a group of medical students. They move silently through the darkened streets, heading towards the gallows outside the city walls. Their goal is to cut down the body of a freshly executed murderer before the authorities can take it away. It's a ghoulish, illegal, and dangerous business. If caught, they could be arrested or even face the wrath of a superstitious mob. Another source was the cemetery. The Resurrection IST, as they were grimly nicknamed, would dig up a newly buried corpse, a practice that filled the general public with horror at the desecration of the dead. Why this desperate criminal activity? Because Vesalius and his students were driven by a revolutionary idea to trust only what they could see with their own eyes. Vesalius, in his early years of teaching, had used Galen's texts as his guide, just like every other professor. But as he dissected human bodies, he began to notice discrepancies. He saw that the human jawbone was a single, solid bone, not two as Galen had described in pigs. He saw that the human liver had 2 lobes, not 5 like a dog's. He searched in vain for the rete mirabile, the marvelous net of blood vessels that Galen said was at the base of the human brain, only to realize it didn't exist. This leads you to the anatomy theater. It's a steep, circular room, built like a small coliseum. Tiers of wooden benches rise up around a central marble slab. The room is crowded with students, artists, and civic leaders, all craning their necks to get a better view. The air is cold to preserve the body, and thick with the smell of death and preservatives. In the center, under the stark light of torches, lies a human corpse, and standing beside it is Vesalius himself. This is his great innovation. Before Vesalius, the professor of anatomy would sit in a high chair, far from the body, reading aloud from the infallible text of Galen. A lowly barber-surgeon would stand by the corpse and do the actual cutting, pointing out the parts as the professor named them. Vesalius rejected this. He came down from his chair, rolled up his sleeves, and took the knife into his own hands. He became the demonstrator, the teacher, and the discoverer, all at once. You watch, mesmerized, as he works. His movements are precise, his knowledge encyclopedic. He is not just dismembering a body, he is revealing it. He traces the paths of nerves, displays the elegant architecture of the bones, and shows the true shape and placement of the organs. And as he dissects, he points out Galen's errors, one by one. It is a quiet, radical act of rebellion, a dismantling of 500 years of medical dogma with a scalpel. The culmination of his work was a masterpiece, a book published in 1543 called Die Human Eich, or Pres Fabricae on the fabric of the human body. It was a monumental work of science and art, filled with hundreds of breathtakingly detailed woodcut illustrations of the human body. The skeletons and muscle men were not just static diagrams. They were posed in dramatic, classical landscapes, as if they were living beings, proudly displaying their own inner workings. It was a book designed to replace Galen, to provide a new, accurate map of the human body. But was Vesalius celebrated as a hero in his own time? The historical reality is complex. His work was hugely influential, but it also provoked a fierce backlash. The established Galenists were furious. His own professor in Paris, a staunch traditionalist, called him a madman who was poisoning medicine with his impious novelties. Academics still debate the extent of the controversy. Some sources claim Vesalius became so disheartened by the criticism that he burned his notes and gave up anatomical research. While this is likely an exaggeration, it speaks to the real resistance he faced. To question Galen was to question the very foundations of medicine, and many were not ready to do that. You see a student next to you, sketching furiously in a notebook, trying to capture the curve of a muscle that Vesalius has just revealed. It is a moment of profound revelation. For the first time, you are seeing the truth of what lies beneath your own skin. The strange theories of wandering wands, the neat diagrams of the zodiac man, the chemical fantasies of the alchemists, they all seem like ghost stories in the face of this physical reality. The body is not a mystical vessel for humors or spirits. It is a machine, a complex, beautiful, and knowable machine. And for the first time in this long journey, medicine has a true and accurate map. The question now is whether anyone knows how to use it. The beautifully illustrated, yet starkly real, images from Vesalius' anatomy theater linger in your mind. You now have a true map of the human body. But what good is a map if the medicines you use are still rooted in folklore and alchemy? As you move forward into the 17th and 18th centuries, you find that the world of medicine is still a chaotic marketplace of competing ideas, where the new science of anatomy coexists with some of the strangest remedies yet. You find yourself in a fashionable apothecary shop in London or Paris. It's a feast for the senses. The air is thick with the scent of 100 different herbs, spices, and strange chemicals. Polished wooden drawers with Latin labels line the walls. But you notice the apothecary recommending a particular product to a wealthy customer who is complaining of headaches and general fatigue. It's a dark, fine powder, sold for a very high price. The apothecary explains that it is the most powerful general tonic available, excellent for preventing apoplexy, healing wounds, and calming the spirits. The name of this wonder drug? Mummy powder. You watch in disbelief as the wealthy patron purchases a small pouch of the stuff. For several centuries, one of the most popular and sought-after medicines in Europe was made from the ground-up remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. It wasn't a fringe folk remedy. It was a standard, respectable pharmaceutical commodity, listed in official pharmacopoeias and prescribed by the most learned physicians. The logic behind it was a twisted knot of different beliefs. The first thread of the idea came from a misunderstanding. The Persian word for bitumen or asphalt was this natural asphalt, which seeped from the ground in some places, was a traditional medicine in the Middle East for centuries. When early Arab travelers saw the blackened, preserved bodies in Egyptian tombs, they assumed the bodies had been soaked in the same asphalt in reality. The Egyptians used a complex mixture of resins, oils, and salts, so they started calling the bodies mumia. Over time, the name for the preserving substance became the name for the preserved body itself. Then, European doctors, with their humoral logic, reasoned that if this mummious substance was so good at preserving a body for thousands of years, it must contain some powerful life minus force or preservative quality. By consuming it, you could transfer that ancient power into your own body. It was a form of medicinal cannibalism, cloaked in the mystique of the ancient world. The trade became immense. Entrepreneurs would travel to Egypt, raid ancient tombs, and shipped the mummified bodies back to Europe to be processed. Apothecaries would have a whole mummy, or parts of one, in their shop, grinding it up as needed. Of course, as demand outstripped the supply of genuine ancient mummies, a gruesome counterfeit industry sprang up. Unscrupulous merchants would take the bodies of recently executed criminals, vagrants, or even people who had died in hospitals, and mummify them. They would stuff the bodies with bitumen, dry them in the sun, and pass them off as authentic pharaonic remains to unsuspecting apothecaries. There's a good chance the expensive powder you just saw being sold was not the 3 Daro minus year minus old remnant of a noble Egyptian, but the 3 minus month minus old remains of a common thief from a nearby city. Historians today still debate the cultural meaning of this practice. Was it simply a medical error born of a linguistic mistake? Or does it reveal something deeper about the early modern European mindset? Some scholars argue it shows a desire to literally consume history, to absorb the perceived power and wisdom of a lost golden age. It was also tied into the fascination with alchemy and the search for an elixir of life. What could be closer to an elixir than a substance that seemed to grant immortality? This wasn't the only ghoulish remedy on the apothecary's shelf. Another popular ingredient was usni, which was the moss scraped from the skull of a man who had been hanged. It was believed to be particularly effective for treating epilepsy and bleeding. The logic was that the skull of a man who had died a violent, sudden death was imbued with a powerful, lingering vital spirit. The moss, having grown in direct contact with that skull, had absorbed this spiritual energy. You could apply the moss directly to a wound to stop bleeding, or take it internally. Even Paracelsus, the medical rebel, promoted a form of this corpse medicine with his weapon salve. The idea was that if you were wounded by a sword, you shouldn't treat the wound itself. Instead, you should anoint the weapon that caused the wound with a special salve made of human fat and blood. The belief was that a sympathetic link existed between the weapon and the wound, and by healing the weapon, you could magically heal the flesh it had cut. You look around the apothecary shop again. On one shelf, you see carefully organized jars of dried herbs, a legacy of the monastery gardens. On another, you see vials of mercury and antimony, the aggressive chemical cures of the Paracelsians. And on the counter, in a place of honor, is a jar of mimea, the powdered dust of a forgotten human being. The new science of Vesalius has given doctors a perfect map of the body, but they are still pouring these ancient, magical, and often gruesome potions into it. Medicine is not moving in a straight line of progress. It is a confusing tangle of the ancient and the modern, the scientific and the profoundly strange. You leave the apothecary shop. The image of powdered mummies and skull mine is moss fresh in your mind. The sheer strangeness of the official pharmacopoeia is unsettling. It seems that the more exotic and expensive the ingredient, the more potent it was believed to be. This quest for rare and powerful remedies leads you from the dusty shelves of the city pharmacist to the opulent world of royal courts and wealthy collectors. You find yourself in the cabinet of curiosities of a great nobleman. It's a room designed to impress, filled with exotic wonders from around the world, colorful seashells, taxidermy birds, strange artifacts from newly discovered lands. Then there, in the center of the room, displayed on a velvet cushion under glass, is his most prized possession. It's a long, white, spiraled horn, tapering to a sharp point. It is, he tells you with a reverent whisper, a unicorn's horn. For centuries, alicorn, the horn of a unicorn, was considered one of the most precious and powerful substances on earth. It was worth many times its weight in gold. Its primary virtue was that it was a universal antidote to all poisons. A king or wealthy merchant would have a piece of the horn, which they would dip into their wine to neutralize any potential assassination attempt. It was also believed to purify water, cure epilepsy, and ward off the plague. Shavings of the horn could be mixed into a potion to cure fevers, and entire cups were sometimes carved from it, creating the ultimate poison-detecting goblet. The belief was so strong that royalty and popes would pay astronomical sums for a specimen. Queen Elizabeth I of England supposedly paid 10 pounds for a unicorn horn, a sum that could have bought a large country estate at the time. The Danish throne, a magnificent ceremonial chair made in the 17th century, was constructed almost entirely from what was believed to be unicorn horns. Of course, as you look at the elegant, spiraled object in the cabinet, you realize the truth. This precious, magical horn did not come from a mythical white horse in an enchanted forest. It came from the cold, dark waters of the Arctic Ocean. It is the single, elongated tooth of a narwhal, a medium-sized species of whale. The male narwhal grows a remarkable canine tooth that can extend up to 10 feet long, piercing through its upper lip. Viking traders were likely the first to bring these strange marine ivories down to the markets of Europe. They were cunning merchants, knowing that no one in Central Europe had ever seen a narwhal. They could pass off the tusk as the horn of the legendary unicorn, a creature everyone knew from myths and tapestries. The spiral pattern and the pure white color fit the popular image of the unicorn perfectly. It was one of the most successful and long-running marketing scams in history. The debate among historians is not about what the horn was, but about the nature of belief. How could intelligent, educated people believe in this for so long? Some scholars argue that in a world where poison was a real and constant fear among the elite, the psychological need for a perfect antidote was immense. The unicorn horn was a physical manifestation of hope, a tangible defense against a hidden threat. Others point to the proof that seemed to exist. A demonstration might be arranged where a spider then believed to be venomous and a piece of bread worked, laced inside a circle drawn with the unicorn horn. The spider would not be able to cross the line to get to the bread, proving the horn's protective power. Of course, this was just a bit of clever stage magic. Even as the age of exploration and scientific curiosity dawned, the belief persisted. It wasn't until the 17th century that the Danish naturalist worm, after receiving a narwhal skull with the tooth still attached, definitively proved that the so-called unicorn horn was, in fact, the tusk of a whale. But even after the scientific evidence was clear, the belief died hard, lingering on as a piece of popular folklore. A quirky side note to this story is what happened when the supply of narwhal tusks was low. Enterprising fakers would sometimes use the horns of other animals, or even fashion fake horns from bone or ivory. But a more peculiar substitute was the fossilized tooth of a mammoth or mastodon. These enormous, ancient teeth, when found, were sometimes identified as belonging to giant, extinct unicorns. You look at the nobleman, his face glowing with pride as he gestures towards his precious alicorn. He is a man of the Renaissance, a patron of the arts and sciences. He might have a copy of Vesalius's anatomy book in his library. He might even be a follower of Paracelsus's new chemical medicine. Yet, he still places his faith in the magical properties of a whale's tooth, an object whose value is built entirely on a foundation of myth, marketing, and wishful thinking. It's a powerful reminder that progress is never a straight line. The human mind is capable of holding contradictory ideas at the same time. You can believe in the cold, hard facts of anatomy while also believing in a magical horn that can cure all ills. In the strange and wonderful cabinet of curiosities that is the history of medicine, there is always room for a unicorn. The world of mythical horns and powdered pharaohs begins to feel like a fever dream. You drift forward in time, crossing the Atlantic to the New World. It's the late 18th century, a time of revolution, enlightenment, and the birth of a new nation. You'd think that in this age of reason, medicine would have finally shed its ancient, dangerous skin. You would be wrong. You find yourself in a stately bedroom at Mount Vernon, Virginia. The air is thick with the somber quiet of a sick room. It is December 1799. And the man lying in the great Firminus poster bed is George Washington, the first president of the United States, a living legend. Just 2 days ago, he was a robust 67 old, riding around his estate in the snow. Now, he is fighting for his life. His illness had come on suddenly. He woke up in the middle of the night with a severe sore throat, struggling to breathe. His doctors were summoned. They were the best, most respected physicians of their day, and they came armed with the medical wisdom of their time, which was, unfortunately, still the wisdom of Galen. The first doctor to arrive, Washington's personal physician Drive, James Craig, immediately diagnosed the problem as a form of inflammatory Quinn's wire croup. In the language of humoral medicine, this was a classic case of an aggressive, fiery inflammation caused by an excess of blood. The logical, standard, and universally accepted treatment was to remove that excess blood. The cure was bloodletting. So began one of the most famous and tragic medical episodes in history. The first bleeding took about 12 to 14 ounces of blood, around 350-400 ml. But Washington's condition did not improve. He was still struggling to breathe. His voice, a hoarse whisper. 2 more physicians were called in for consultation. They agreed with the diagnosis and the course of treatment. More bleeding was required. Over the course of the next several hours, Washington was bled a total of 4 times. By the end of it, his doctors had removed an astonishing amount of blood, at least 80 ounces, or about 2.4 liters. That's estimated to be somewhere between 40% and 50% of the entire blood volume of a man his size. But that wasn't all. In between the bleeding they applied a variety of other standard humoral treatments. They applied poultices of blistering beetles, cantha rides to his throat, hoping to draw the bad humors out through the skin. They gave him a tartar emetic to make him vomitant, another medicine to purge his bowels. They even had him inhale a steam of water and vinegar, which nearly suffocated him. Every single treatment was designed to do one thing: to drain the body of its fluids, to rebalance the humors. We now know, with the benefit of hindsight, that Washington was likely suffering from acute epigopodyls, a bacterial infection that causes the small flap of cartilage at the back of the throat to swell up, obstructing the airway. It's a true medical emergency. The one thing a person with a compromised airway needs is oxygen and fluids. The treatments Washington received did the exact opposite. The aggressive bloodletting would have sent him into hypovolemic shock, drastically lowering his blood pressure and starving his body of the very oxygen it was already struggling to get. One of the younger doctors present, Alshadick, did protest. He argued against the final, massive bloodletting, suggesting it would be fatal. He even proposed a radical, almost unheard minus of procedure array. He wanted to make a small incision in Washington's windpipe, below the swelling, to create an emergency airway. The older, more experienced doctors dismissed the idea as too dangerous and experimental. They chose to stick with the trusted, traditional methods. The historical debate here is not about the cause of death. It's clear the treatment was the primary culprit. The debate is about fairness. Is it right to judge these doctors by our modern standards? For centuries, they were portrayed as incompetent butchers who killed the father of their country. But many historians now argue that they were simply acting as any competent physician of their time would have. They were applying the accepted best practices of their era. They were not ignorant or malicious. They were radically, profoundly wrong. To have done anything else would have been considered medical malpractice in 1799. There is a small, curious detail in the accounts of his final hours. At one point, Washington was offered a bowl of molasses, vinegar, and butter. It's thought that this might have been a folk remedy for sore throats. This little detail shows that even in this high-stakes medical drama, with the best doctors in attendance, old fashioned home remedies still had a place at the bedside. As the evening wore on, Washington knew he was dying. He calmly checked his own pulse. a gesture that spoke of his incredible composure. He thanked his doctors for their efforts, essentially absolving them of blame. He gave his final instructions and passed away late in the evening. You stand in the corner of the room, a silent witness to this tragedy. You have seen how the ancient theory of the four humors, born in the sunshine of ancient Greece, has reached its long, dark arm across 2 millennia to claim the life of one of the most important figures of the 18th century. It's a chilling testament to the power of a wrong idea, and a somber reminder that even in an age of reason, the dead hand of the past can have a tight and deadly grip. The tragic, unnecessary death of George Washington feels like a grim end minus chapter for humoral medicine. The 19th century dawns, and with it comes a fervent desire for new theories, new approaches. The world is awash with the energy of the Industrial Revolution, and the medical field is no different. It's a time of wild experimentation, where science, showmanship, and pseudoscience collide. You find yourself drawn away from the world of blood and beetles and into the elegant, perfumed salons of late 18th and early 19th century Paris. Here, a charismatic and controversial Viennese physician named Franz Anton Mesmer is captivating high society with a new and mysterious medical theory. He doesn't talk about humors or miasmas. He talks about an invisible, universal force. Mesmer proposed that a subtle and detectable fluid, which he called animal magnetism, permeates the entire universe and flows through all living things. In a healthy person, this fluid flows freely, in perfect harmony with the cosmos. But in a sick person, the flow is blocked. His job, as a physician, was to restore this flow. You decide to attend one of his famous group therapy sessions. You enter a lavishly decorated room, dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn. Mirrors line the walls, reflecting the soft candlelight. Ethereal music, often played on a glass harmonica, an instrument Mesmer himself was an expert on, drifts through the air. In the center of the room is a large oaken tub, a bulkhead, filled with water, iron filings, and magnetized glass bottles. Iron rods protrude from the tub. You and the other patients, mostly fashionable, wealthy women, sit in a circle around the tub, holding onto the iron rods. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation. Then, Mesmer himself makes his grand entrance. He is a commanding figure, dressed in a magnificent silk robe. He walks slowly around the circle, making intense eye contact with each patient. He might pass his hands over their bodies, a technique he called making passes, without ever touching them. He carries a magnetized iron wand, which he points at the afflicted parts of their bodies. His goal is to induce a crisis. As he works his magnetic magic, some of the patients begin to react. One might start to sigh and weep. Another might break out in hysterical laughter. Some begin to convulse, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. These seizures were not seen as a side effect. They were seen as the cure itself. This was the moment the magnetic blockage was being broken, the moment the cosmic fluid was being violently restored to its proper flow. Assistants would carry the convulsing women into a padded crisis room next door to thrash about until they were calm. This was mesmerism, the phenomenon that would later give us the word mesmerize, and it was an absolute sensation. Mesmer became incredibly famous and wealthy, but was he a pioneering scientist or a theatrical charlatan? This became a subject of intense official debate. In 1784, King Louis XVI of France appointed a royal commission to investigate Mesmer's claims. This commission was a scientific supergroup. It included the chemist Juan Lavoisier, the astronomer Jean-Sylvain Bailly, and an American diplomat who happened to be an expert on electricity, Benjamin Franklin. The commission conducted a series of brilliant experiments. In one, they blindfolded a patient and told her Mesmer was magnetizing a specific tree in a garden. She was then led out and hugged several trees, eventually falling into a classic mesmeric convulsion at the wrong tree, one that had not been magnetized. In another experiment, they magnetized 1 cup of water out of 5. A patient drank from all 5 cups and reacted to the wrong one. Their conclusion was decisive. There was no evidence of any magnetic fluid. The effects, they argued, were caused by the patient's own belief in the power of imagination. It was one of the first and most famous controlled, blind studies in history. The Commission's report officially debunked Mesmer's theory. He was discredited and eventually faded into obscurity. But the phenomenon he had unleashed did not go away. One of his students, the Marquis de Puysegur, found that he could induce a state in his patients that was not a violent crisis, but a calm, trance-like sleep, which he called artificial somnambulism. In this state, patients seemed to be able to talk and respond to commands. This was the true birth of what we now call hypnotism. A strange footnote to the story of animal magnetism is its connection to the spiritualist movement later in the 19th century. Mesmeric trances were often seen as a gateway to the spirit world. People in a trance claimed they could communicate with the dead, see the future, or diagnose diseases with supernatural clarity. The pseudoscience of animal magnetism bled directly into the supernatural beliefs of spiritualism. Historians today look back on Mesmer as a complex figure. He was almost certainly a showman, and his theory of magnetic fluids was pure fantasy. But, in his own strange, theatrical way, he had stumbled upon something very real: the power of the mind to affect the body. He was one of the first people in the modern West to practice a form of psychotherapy. He demonstrated, albeit for all the wrong reasons, the profound reality of suggestion and the placebo effect. You leave the salon, the ethereal notes of the glass harmonica still ringing in your ears. You haven't seen any invisible fluids, but you have witnessed a powerful demonstration of human psychology. Mesmer may not have been able to manipulate a cosmic force, but he was a master at manipulating the hopes, fears, and imaginations of his patients. And in the history of medicine, that has often been a kind of magic all its own. The strange, theatrical world of Mesmer's salons, with its invisible fluids and psychological trances, feels like a detour from the main path of physical medicine. You find yourself pulled back into a more tangible, and far more gruesome, corner of the 19th century medical world. You are in need of a new set of teeth, your own, after years of questionable diets, metallic medicines, and rudimentary hygiene. Are in a sorry state, you need dentures. You visit a high-end dental surgeon in London. He is a craftsman and a businessman. He assures you he can provide you with the finest set of false teeth available, made from a durable, natural-looking material. The best on the market, he says, are Waterloo teeth. He explains the name with a grim sort of pride. The raw materials for his finest dentures were harvested directly from the mouths of the tens of thousands of young, healthy soldiers who fell at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. It was a gruesome but highly efficient supply chain. As soon as the battle was over, before the mass graves were dug, resurrectionists and enterprising locals would swarm the battlefield. They were not looking for wallets or heirlooms. They were armed with pliers, and they were hunting for teeth. They would pry the teeth from the jaws of the dead soldiers' cavalrymen, infantrymen, from the French, British, and Prussian armies alike. These were ideal specimens, the teeth of strong young men, largely free from the decay that plagued the sugar-rich diets of the wealthy. The teeth were sorted, cleaned, and sold by the barrel-full to dentists across Europe. The dentist would then craft the dentures. The process was painstaking. He would drill holes through the roots of the individual human teeth and thread them onto a curved base, often carved from hippopotamus or walrus ivory. This base was then fitted to the customer's gums. The result was a set of dentures that were, in terms of appearance, remarkably lifelike. After all, they were made of real human teeth. This practice wasn't new, but Waterloo provided such a massive, concentrated supply that it revolutionized the industry for a generation. Before this, Dentists had to rely on a piecemeal supply from grave robbers, executioners who were given the teeth of the hanged, or even poor people who would sell their own teeth out of desperation. There are even records of dentists advertising for live teeth, where a person could essentially have a tooth extracted on the spot for cash. George Washington himself, a famous sufferer of dental problems his whole life, famously wore dentures. A common myth is that his false teeth were made of wood. This isn't true. He had several sets throughout his life, and they were made from a combination of materials, including carved ivory, lead, and yes, human teeth, which he purchased from his own enslaved workers. One of his ledgers shows a payment to Negroes for 9 teeth. It's a deeply disturbing detail that highlights the brutal realities of the time. But why go to all this ghoulish trouble? Why not use animal teeth? They did try, but animal teeth were the wrong shape and color, and they wore down quickly. The only truly acceptable material for the discerning wealthy patient was human. The historical debate around this practice centers on the mindset of the time. How could a wealthy, refined lady or gentleman be comfortable putting the teeth of a dead soldier in their mouth? The answer lies in their complete lack of understanding of germ theory. The concept of bacteria and cross-minus infection was still decades away. To them, a tooth was just a piece of enamel and dentin. Once it was cleaned, it was just a raw material, no different from ivory or bone. The idea that it could harbor invisible, deadly organisms from its previous owner was simply not part of their reality. They were not ghouls. They were just profoundly, blissfully ignorant of microbiology. There was, however, one very strange and unfounded fear associated with these second-hand teeth. Some people worried that the teeth might retain a memory or sympathetic connection to their original owner. There were folk tales of people with transplanted teeth suddenly getting cravings for the foods their donor had enjoyed, or even murmuring words in a foreign language in their sleep. It was a supernatural anxiety, not a scientific one. You look at the dentist's sample set, a perfect, gleaming smile fashioned from the jaws of the dead. It is a masterpiece of morbid craftsmanship. The practice of using human teeth for dentures began to decline in the mid-19th century with the development of vulcanite E, a type of hardened rubber that could be molded to fit the gums and into which porcelain teeth could be set. It was cheaper, more hide in the ink, and didn't require robbing graves. For now, though, you are faced with a choice. You can live with the gaps in your smile, or you can purchase a new one, a smile that was born on a bloody battlefield in Belgium. It is a potent symbol of 19th-century medicine and practice that demonstrates incredible technical skill and artistry, yet is underpinned by a complete and chilling disregard for the things that are unseen. It is a world that could rebuild a mouth, but had no idea what a microbe was. You turn away from the gruesome marketplace of recycled body parts, seeking a cure that is not scavenged from the dead, but cultivated from the living. The journey takes you out of the sprawling, grimy cities and into the green, rolling hills of late 18th century rural England. Here, a different kind of terror hangs in the air, one that has haunted humanity for millennia. It is smallpox. It is a disease of horrifying cruelty. It begins with a fever and aches, then erupts into a pustular rash that covers the entire body. It is highly contagious and often fatal. Those who survive are not spared. They are often left permanently scarred, their faces pitted with deep pock marks. Many are left blind. It is a disease that respects no one, striking down milk, maids, and monarchs with equal ferocity. For most of the 18th century, the only defense against it was a risky and terrifying procedure called variola. Doctors would take matter from the fresh pustule of a person suffering from smallpox and introduce it into a scratch on the skin of a healthy person. The goal was to induce a mild case of the disease, one that would hopefully grant lifelong immunity. But it was a desperate gamble. The mild case could easily turn into a full-blown, fatal one, and even if the patients survived, they were contagious, and could easily start a new epidemic in their community. It was like fighting a fire by setting a smaller, supposedly controllable fire right next to it. But here, in the quiet countryside of Gloucestershire, you encounter a country doctor named Edward Jenner. He is not a grand theorist like Mesmer or a firebrand like Paracelsus. He is a man of science, but also a man of the people, an astute observer of the natural world around him, and he has spent years listening to a piece of local folk wisdom, a persistent rumor that floats around the dairy farms. The local milkmaids, women whose hands are constantly in contact with cows, often contracted a mild disease called cowpox. It caused a few pustules on their hands and some minor discomfort, but it was otherwise harmless. And the milkmaids would often boast, "I shall never have smallpox, for I have had cowpox." They claimed that having suffered the trivial animal disease gave them some kind of protection against the terrifying human one. Most doctors dismissed this as an old wives' tale, but Jenner wondered. He saw that the milkmaids did, in fact, seemed to be spared during smallpox outbreaks. For over 20 years, he collected stories and observed cases, his mind methodically connecting the dots. He formed a hypothesis: what if the cowpox bus was a safer, gentler version of the smallpox bus used in variola? What if it could confer the same immunity, but without the deadly risk? This brings you to a day in May of 1796, a day that will become a pivotal moment in the history of medicine. Jenner is about to conduct a daring, and by modern standards, terrifyingly unethical experiment. His test subject is an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps, the son of his gardener. The source of the cure is a young milkmaid named Sarah Ann Elms, who has a fresh cowpox sore on her hand. You watch as Jenner takes a small lancet and collects a bit of fluid from the pustule on Sarah's hand. He then makes 2 small scratches on the arm of young James and carefully introduces the cowpox matter into the cuts. Over the next few days, the boy develops a mild fever and a sore on his arm where the scratch was made, but he doesn't get seriously ill. He recovers quickly. The first part of the experiment is a success, but the second part is the truly terrifying leap of faith. Several weeks later, to see if the cowpox has actually conferred immunity, Jenner must deliberately expose the boy to smallpox. He takes pus from a smallpox victim and inoculates James with it, using the same variola technique that so oft unproved fatal. Then, all he can do is wait. It is a moment of supreme tension. If his theory is wrong, he has likely just condemned this child to a horrible death. But James Phipps remains perfectly healthy. He shows no signs of smallpox. The folk wisdom was true. The cowpox had given him protection. Jenner had found the key. He called his new technique vaccination. And here we find a wonderful little piece of linguistic history. The word comes directly from the Latin word for cow. Vacu. Vaccination literally means cow-minusification. The very name of this life-saving procedure is a permanent tribute to the humble cows and observant milkmaids who inspired it. Now, was Jenner the very first person to ever try this? This is a topic of ongoing academic discussion. The historical record shows that others had noticed the connection before him. As early as 1774, a Dorset farmer named Benjamin Just Y had vaccinated his own wife and children with cowpox matter during a smallpox epidemic. So what was Jenner's unique contribution? It was that he didn't just perform the procedure. He studied it, documented it, and, most importantly, he published his findings and championed the cause. He turned a piece of folk medicine into a scientifically validated and widely promoted medical practice. He was the great publicist and scientist of the discovery, not necessarily its sole originator. You stand at a profound turning point. The discovery of vaccination is more than just a cure for one disease. It is the birth of a whole new way of thinking about medicine. It is the dawn of immunology. For the first time, doctors are not just trying to rebalance imaginary fluids or drive out evil spirits. They are using a targeted, biological intervention to prevent a disease before it can even start. It is a victory for observation, for experimentation, and for a quiet country doctor who had the wisdom to listen to a milkmaid. The long, bizarre night of humoral medicine is finally ending, and the first rays of a new, more scientific dawn are breaking. The discovery of vaccination feels like a clean, decisive victory, a triumph of observation over ancient dogma. You stand at the threshold of the modern world, feeling the warmth of this new scientific dawn. And yet, the room for error, for bizarre and deadly misunderstandings, has not vanished completely. It has simply shrunk, retreating into new corners. Even with Jenner's breakthrough, the fundamental question remains: what is sickness? If it isn't always a humoral imbalance or a miasma, what is it? The answer lies in the hospitals of the mid-19th century, which, despite the new knowledge, are still terrifying places. A patient might survive a surgeon's brilliant operation only to die a week later from something they call hospital gangrene or ward fever. The infections that rampage through surgical wards are so common that they are considered an unavoidable part of the process. And this leads you to one of the last great, truly bizarre medical beliefs of the pre-modern era, the concept of laudable pus. You are in a surgical ward in London or Paris before the revolution of germ theory. You watch as a surgeon inspects the wound of a patient who has just had an amputation. The wound is using a thick, creamy, yellowish-white pus. The surgeon looks at it, nods, and a look of relief crosses his face. Good, he might murmur. The pus is laudable. To our minds, this is horrifying. Pus is the sign of a raging infection. But to the